Mao Mao actually smuggled erotic books and illustrations into the palace. The second season of Medicinal Girl has finally arrived. But Mao Mao never expected that the erotic illustrations she had the madam send to the palace would be confiscated by Jinshi. Today, Jinshi was inspecting Gyokuyuhi's palace, looking everywhere but couldn't find Mao Mao. Knowing his intentions, Gyokuyuhi told him Mao Mao was at the medical office. At that moment, Mao Mao was busy distilling essential oils, using a distillation device found during cleaning, with materials left over from making blue roses. Upon seeing Jinshi, Mao Mao asked him what he needed. Jinshi, ever so tsundere, was immediately annoyed. "Do I need a reason to see you?" He questioned why Mao Mao wasn't doing this in the Jade Palace. Mao Mao whispered to him that some essential oils could cause miscarriage, though in small amounts they were harmless. However, Mao Mao didn't want unrelated people to know about Gyokuyuhi's pregnancy. Jinshi then noticed the distillation on the stove. Mao Mao explained it was for distilling alcohol, which after several distillations would produce high-purity alcohol for disinfection, keeping the environment clean. While demonstrating, someone delivered a package to Mao Mao, which made her immediately anxious. To avoid arousing Jinshi's suspicion, she claimed it contained underwear, piquing Jinshi's interest even more. Kojun also became curious about what kind of underwear needed two men to carry. Eventually, the contents were exposed. Mao Mao had brought these items into the palace with good intentions. The palace maids, mostly virgins, could be unprepared if chosen by the emperor, which could lead to serious problems. So, Mao Mao bought these items for their education. Moreover, she initially ordered these books because the emperor enjoyed them. This time, to expand sales, she bought extra, but Jinshi happened to catch her. Kojun was seriously examining the books, impressed by their exquisite craftsmanship. Besides text, there were illustrations, printed not from wood blocks, but from metal engravings, a rare quality that Mao Mao naturally wanted to promote. After hearing this, Jinshi couldn't help but flip through them, and Kojun quietly suggested he could keep a few if he liked. Jinshi, the stubborn man, refused, saying he could let Mao Mao off the hook but needed her to disclose the bookstore, claiming he was just interested in the printing technology. Mao Mao gave a knowing look, but Kojun, citing the explicit content, demanded to review them first. Thus, Mao Mao's carefully selected erotic books were all taken away. A few days later, Mao Mao went to play with Quran, hearing that a novel was circulating among the servant maids. Although these maids were illiterate, those who could read would narrate it to others, and the novel had become popular in the harem. When Mao Mao returned to the Jade Palace, she found the emperor had distributed it to all the consorts. The upper class usually considered such popular novels vulgar. What was the emperor's intention? Mao Mao also noticed the seal on the book was from the shop she had told Jinshi about. Clearly, Jinshi had suggested this to the emperor. She wished she had asked for a commission. Unable to discern Jinshi's intentions, Mao Mao continued her work, while her sisters had already finished the novel. Aaron felt it was a pity that only a few maids enjoyed such good material, but it was problematic to lend the emperor's gift to others. Mao Mao suggested she could copy the content for other maids to read, praising Aaron's neat handwriting. Mao Mao also began to understand Jinshi's intentions. With books circulating in the harem, more people would want to learn to read. When she served as Jinshi's maid, he had once asked how to increase literacy among the maids. It turned out Jinshi had made it happen. Even Quran asked Mao Mao to teach her to read, as the maid who had been narrating the novels had lost her voice, leaving them with a written copy. Many maids were illiterate, so Mao Mao offered to read to Quran, but Quran felt she should take the opportunity to learn herself. Thus, Mao Mao began teaching her, starting with her name and some medicinal herbs. Quran questioned if these words were commonly used. Mao Mao immediately erased them, starting over with everyday language. Princess Linli can now run and jump. The emperor has also allowed her to leave the palace. Besides 2 guards, Gyokuyuhi hopes Mao Mao and Hanyan can accompany her, teaching Linli about flowers and wildlife. Who knows where this child might marry in the future? Mao Mao understands Gyokuyuhi's intentions. Although Princess Linli is still young, she may be involved in a political marriage in 10 years. Learning about medicine and poisons could be beneficial. Thus, Linli stepped out of the Jade Palace with everyone's company, bathed in various gazes. She cannot understand them now, but one day the princess will discern the malice or envy hidden in those looks. Linley was attracted by a bed of flowers. Mao Mao told her they were called primroses. The next second, the princess ran towards an alley, drawn by a sound. Mao Mao squeezed in to investigate and found a kitten. The wary kitten dashed out, and Mao Mao chased after it but missed. Unexpectedly, a strange palace maid caught the kitten and handed it to Mao Mao before running off. Because the kitten was dirty, Mao Mao didn't let the princess touch it and took it back to the medical office first. The incompetent Dr. Nguyen immediately made a nest for the kitten and placed a hot water bottle nearby for warmth. Mao Mao asked him to get some animal milk and intestines from the cafeteria, since the texture of intestines resembles a mother cat's nipples. She then began to wipe the kitten's body and used oil to kill the fleas. Soon, Nguyen brought back goat milk, and watching the kitten suckle melted their hearts. That evening, the emperor visited the Jade Palace and, learning they had found a kitten, allowed it to stay in the palace and specifically asked Mao Mao to take care of it. Once the kitten regained some energy, Mao Mao gave it a bath. After some time, the cat could eat shredded chicken and started to defecate on its own. To prevent it from scratching the princess, Mao Mao carefully trimmed the kitten's nails. Jinshi, hearing that Mao Mao was recently a litter cleaner, brought dried small fish to console her. He checked and saw it was a female kitten. Mao Mao remarked, "Good thing it doesn't need to be neutered," which instantly hit Jinshi's sore spot. She quickly pulled out some snacks to entertain Lord Jinshi. Both Kojun and Nguyen showed potential as cat slaves, while Jinshi couldn't understand the appeal. Mao Mao felt the same, but cat lovers say they like cats because they can't tell what cats are thinking, and they never tire of watching them, gradually wanting to touch them. Cats usually ignore people, only showing affection when they want food. Jinshi couldn't help but think of Mao Mao. Realizing he himself was a cat slave, he began affectionately nuzzling the kitten's belly. Mao Mao looked on with disdain, while Jinshi also understood the benefits of cats. Later, the emperor even appointed the kitten as an official for catching bandits, as it was good at catching rats that stole medicinal herbs, and named it Mao Mao. Meanwhile, a caravan was heading towards the palace. The day for the caravan's arrival is approaching again. This caravan is an advance party of foreign dignitaries, large in scale and staying longer than usual. Jinshi has instructed Kojun to pay close attention to these important diplomatic guests. As the weather warms, the palace harem has started updating their wardrobes. Hanyan is assigning tasks to everyone. Mao Mao and the others are responsible for organizing the clothing, setting aside outdated garments for tailors to refurbish. These are then sent as gifts to Gyoku Yuhi's homeland, with Mao Mao adding moth-repellent herbs for protection. During this time, Iron informs them that new maids are expected soon, as Gyoku Yuhi is pregnant again, and more help will be needed, especially since Lulan has over 50 maids and servants, while favored Gyoku Yuhi has only 5, which is hardly presentable. After storing the old clothes, it is naturally time to acquire new ones, taking advantage of the caravan's visit to the palace for a major shopping spree. On the other hand, Rifahi has listed items to purchase and sent her maid to buy them. However, after descending the stairs, Shin sees a letter from the clinic and her expression darkens immediately. The palace remains a place of intrigue, but the caravan has arrived on schedule, staying for 5 days. The first few days are primarily for the ladies and their maids. Koran, a servant, can hardly get close. After spending some time in the harem, Mao Mao finds this place increasingly peculiar. So many permanent residents, yet no shops, and only a quack for a doctor, making disease spread easily. Fortunately, sanitation is well managed with sewage directly discharged into a large river, thanks to the Queen introducing Western water management technology. If sanitation is maintained, diseases can be prevented. However, severe illness results in being sent home. On the last day, Koran, who can finally take a break, hopes Mao Mao will join her for a stroll. Mao Mao naturally agrees. Upon returning, they discover how much everyone has bought. Even the typically frugal Gyoku Yuhi seems to have splurged. Most of the garments feature wide sleeves and skirts that tie below the bust, styles touted by merchants as fashionable. Mao Mao speculates about the timing, as outside the palace, Gyoku Yuhi's pregnancy isn't public knowledge yet. Merchants usually bring styles their clients prefer. Gyoku Yuhi likes fitted waist designs, but with her growing belly, she'll opt for looser fits. If the merchants brought these styles intentionally, their motives might be suspect. Out of caution, Mao Mao suggests asking the merchants about fitted waist designs tomorrow. Gyokuyuhi immediately understands Mao Mao's hint. On the final day, Mao Mao and Karan go shopping together. Mao Mao buys Karan 2 new red hair ties, moving Karan to tears of joy. They visit a stall selling tea and spices, ready to bargain hard as merchants typically offer discounts on the last day. When Mao Mao spots jasmine tea, so does another maid, a familiar face who helped with a cat before. Mao Mao buys 3 jasmine teas, and they all go to see the cats, brewing the tea which blossoms beautifully when hot water is poured, both delightful to watch and taste. The quack doctor brought mooncakes as snacks for the tea. Shisui saw the caravan for the first time and curiously asked if it was always as lively as a festival. The quack explained that this time it was because foreign envoys were expected soon. Shisui then mentioned a strange smell recently from the north side, which has always been quite dirty and possibly had a clogged sewer. Shisui ventured to the north side because it was a good spot to catch many insects, and she even drew them, surprisingly lifelike. When Mao Mao heard there were large spiders there, her eyes lit up, and she immediately planned to visit with Shisui next time. Several days had passed since the caravan left. Recently, essential oils imported from the west became popular in the harem. While Mao Mao was hanging clothes for Karan, she smelled rose oil and considered selling the rose water she had made before. Suddenly, she remembered that strong scents like rose essential oil could negatively affect pregnant women. She immediately checked their clothes in the Jade Palace and indeed detected the rose scent. She smelled the clothes from other palaces and found the same scent everywhere, which alarmed her. She rushed to the Crystal Palace, which was susceptible to trends, and without regard, started sniffing the maids' clothes as they changed, which seemed bizarre to them. Shin then complained about Mao Mao to Jinshi. Mao Mao, unrepentant, promised to ask for permission next time before sniffing. She began to document the spices and essential oils she detected on the maids, and showed it to Jinshi, noting that all were harmful to pregnant women. Besides essential oils, the caravan also sold spices and tea, like the jasmine that Mao Mao bought, which could cause uterine contractions. Other spices could also potentially induce miscarriages. This incident resembled a past event where items with little-known side effects appeared in the harem, similar to what poisoned Princess Linley and killed Rafahi's child. Though Mao Mao couldn't be certain, these items had toxic side effects but weren't necessarily seen as poison due to their safe use in small quantities. Nonetheless, a warning to the consort seemed prudent. Gyokuyuhi immediately had her maids investigate thoroughly. The palace remained fraught with danger. The court lady Suire, who had once escaped from a feigned death, was still missing. The attempted assassination during the Zhongxi incident likely involved many, and the extent of the mastermind's reach remained unknown. Mao Mao was taught by her foster father never to speculate without evidence. If she weren't a personal maid to the consorts, she would earn very little and wouldn't have been interested in the caravan. If the essential oils hadn't become fashionable, she might not have noticed. But it could also be that this time just happened to have many such items. What was coincidental and what was inevitable? Mao Mao couldn't figure it out. Just as she prepared to sip the brewed jasmine tea, Jinshi appeared without Kojun. He asked Mao Mao to make him a cup of that jasmine tea, though it was the last one. Pouring more hot water only made it a second brew, but Jinshi didn't mind. While making new tea, Mao Mao explained the benefits of jasmine tea, which are often overlooked due to its side effects. She mentioned it could even treat male infertility, which made Jinshi's face fall. Realizing she had gone too far, she ended up offending Jinshi, who then left. After he left, Kojun immediately reported a significant event to him. Consort Shizuka had died. News of Princess Shizuka's death quickly spread to the Jade Palace, rumored to be from food poisoning. Gyokuyuhi had heard that Shizuka had been bedridden for the past year. During this time, Jinshi visited with Kojun, and Mao Mao learned from a quack doctor that a palace maid named Tao had disappeared. Despite being close to completing her service and her upcoming marriage to a promising civil officer, this excellent maid vanished suddenly, which Mao Mao noted but chose not to intervene given the nature of the harem. Upon her return, Mao Mao saw Jinshi engaging warmly with Gyokuyuhi. As soon as he saw her, Jinshi took Mao Mao aside to discuss the emperor's recent initiative of distributing novels for the consort's entertainment. which were then read by the maids to other palace maids, sparking a frenzy of literacy among them. Jinshi proposed setting up a calligraphy class in the harem, which Mao Mao surprisingly praised as a good idea, shocking both Jinshi and Kojun since Mao Mao seldom gave direct compliments. Mao Mao recommended establishing the calligraphy class in the dilapidated North Side Square, suggesting it be presented as vocational training to attract more participants, and occasionally offering snacks as incentives. Jinshi took her practical suggestions to heart. He then inquired if she knew about mushrooms, which she did, given their use in cuisine and medicine. With it being mushroom season, there were frequent cases of food poisoning from palace maids, picking them indiscriminately. Jinshi asked her to remove any potentially poisonous mushrooms and inform him about their types. During this task, all other duties at the Jade Palace, except for testing poisons, were suspended for her. Mao Mao wondered why Jinshi hadn't discussed this in front of Gyokuyuhi, suspecting he might have an ulterior motive, but she was quite willing to undertake this task. She headed to the secluded north side, the likely spot for maids to secretly forage. Sure enough, many mushrooms were growing there. Mao Mao was excited, but then smelled a pungent odor, recalling Shisui's mention of a strange smell previously. She speculated that the smell was from sewage overflow, which fertilized the mushrooms. After a day of foraging, she returned dirty to the Jade Palace with a full basket of mushrooms, including some suitable for medicinal use, which she stored in the medical office. She then quickly went to help Gyokuyuhi test for poisons, and noticed that both she and Hanyan wore black cords, signaling another consort's death. On the way, Hanyan informed her that Princess Shizuka had passed away. Shizuka had been reclusive due to illness for a year, rumored to have died from food poisoning, never favored by the emperor, and was known for her difficult personality and jealousy towards other consorts and maids, even being violent towards those of lower status. During that time, Gyokuyuhi, who was pregnant with a princess, was poisoned. When Jinshi confronted the suspect, they showed no fear and challenged him to present evidence. Without evidence, the matter was dropped, but the chaos within Shizuka's quarters was well known. The news of the maid's bullying came out after her death, which reassured Hanyan, who was loyally devoted to Gyokuyuhi. Mao Mao suddenly connected this to the task Jinshi had given her, suspecting that someone in the Jade Palace might have poisoned Princess Shizuka with poisonous mushrooms. Of course, Mao Mao didn't believe Gyokuyuhi would do such a thing, as she had more sophisticated means at her disposal as a favored consort. None of the other maids seemed capable of secretly administering poison. Could Jinshi suspect her? That might explain why he had her search for poisonous mushrooms and observe her reaction. While taking a flower from one of Shizuka's maids, Mao Mao noticed scars on the maid's palm. Shizuka's body was tightly covered, revealing nothing. At that moment, another consort burst in, pulling back the cloth to reveal Shizuka's face covered in scars and patchy hair, symptoms identical to hers. The crazed consort cursed Shizuka for bringing it upon herself. Seeing these marks, Mao Mao understood what Jinshi was looking for. The next day, Mao Mao returned to the north side to search for mushrooms. The consort who had disrupted the funeral, a lower-ranked consort once favored by the emperor, had abruptly fallen ill with a mysterious disease 2 years ago. The emperor had kept her in the harem but never visited again. Her outburst at Shizuka's funeral was likely due to her suspicion that her illness was caused by Shizuka. Mao Mao finally found the culprit of the consort's strange illness, the poisonous mushrooms. She immediately called Jinshi and Kojun to the medical office, instructing them to take precautions before revealing the securely wrapped mushrooms. This type of mushroom was rare but extremely dangerous, capable of killing with just a small piece and even toxic to touch. Mao Mao stopped Jinshi from getting too close and showed him her own scar from encountering the mushroom while gathering herbs with her father. However, the important thing was the symptoms on Shizuka's body, which were almost certainly caused by this mushroom. Jinshi sighed, revealing that when the lower-ranked consort fell ill 2 years ago, they suspected poisoning, and Shizuka was rumored to be the poisoner, though no evidence was found. A year later, Shizuka exhibited the same symptoms and deteriorated rapidly. Jinshi visited her monthly but could never converse with her. Given her pride, it seemed likely she had taken her own life, unable to bear her condition, according to the maid's testimonies. Mao Mao immediately spotted a flaw in this theory. If Shizuka had died from eating the poisonous mushrooms, she should have shown symptoms like abdominal pain and paralysis, and inflammation in the mouth, not spreading to the face. Moreover, the facial decay looked fresh, as if directly applied with the mushrooms, yet Shizuka's hands were clean. Remembering the scars on the maid's hand who gave her the flower, Mao Mao formed a theory. She borrowed several strong eunuchs from Jinshi, who trusted her investigative skills, knowing she only needed evidence when she had that look. Mao Mao conducted further investigations and took Kojun and the eunuchs to a forest in the north, where they found a densely mushroom-covered lawn. Digging there, they unearthed a body adorned with Shizuka's emblem, confirming it was indeed her, dead for about a year, matching the timeline of her illness. This suggested that Shizuka had been dead for some time, and the Shizuka seen later was an imposter. Combining this with what she heard from the quack about Tao, the missing maid who resembled Shizuka closely and was similar in height and build, Mao Mao speculated that the tyrannical Shizuka, unable to bear another woman resembling her receiving suitor's affection, often vented her frustrations on Tao. Eventually, Tao, unable to tolerate it any further, fought back, leading to Shizuka's death. The maids, either out of self-preservation or sympathy for Tao, let her impersonate Shizuka. However, with her marriage approaching, Tao could no longer maintain the deception. These were Mao Mao's deductions, so she didn't share them with Jinshi. He was merely curious about how she knew where the body was. Mao Mao enthusiastically showed him the mushrooms she had collected, explaining that those nearby often grew near animal corpses or waste and had a distinctive rotting smell. Surprised it was caused by a corpse, Mao Mao had been observing the mushrooms there happily. Realizing this might be inappropriate, she faced Jinshi's questions about her plans for the mushrooms. Despite her explanations and pleas, Kojun ended up confiscating all but one that fell to the ground. Yet, Mao Mao remained curious about the nature and potential effects of mushrooms grown on a corpse. Recently, 2 stunning beauties arrived at the imperial palace as foreign envoys. They brought with them full-length mirrors, crafted differently from those made domestically. These mirrors reflected images with exceptional clarity. Mao Mao, curious, took a closer look and thought that if these could be mass-produced domestically, they could potentially make a fortune. Unfortunately, glass products were generally available only in Western countries. She wondered what important matters the envoys wished to discuss, bringing such valuable gifts from overseas. Soon after, Kojun approached Mao Mao, sharing a dilemma about a friend troubled by a pair of sisters. These sisters, very similar in appearance and daughters of a wealthy family, were overprotected by their parents as they grew older. They were confined to their home and monitored by maids. However, one sympathetic maid occasionally took them out secretly. When discovered, she was dismissed. A new maid was hired, and male servants were placed outside to keep watch. The sisters spent their days embroidering inside. Suddenly one day, the older sister claimed the younger sister was pregnant with a divine child. Mao Mao's first thought was that the maid had secretly let them out again. However, Kojun said the new maid rarely interacted with the sisters. Hanyan speculated whether it involved the male servant watching them, but he was not permitted near their room. Mao Mao was stumped, but from a medical perspective, there is a phenomenon known as pseudocyesis. She recalled young courtesans at the brothel claiming to be pregnant with their lovers' children, showing all physical signs of pregnancy but not actually being pregnant. However, Kojun clearly used this situation as a metaphor for something else. He just wanted to know if it was possible for the younger sister to have sneaked out. He then produced a layout of the room. The sisters lived in a separate building on the north side, connected to the main house by a west corridor, the only exit. The east and south sides each had a window, watched by male servants stationed at the third and first floors of the residence, making it nearly impossible to see inside. However, the sisters spent most of their time near the windows, so any absence would be obvious. Mao Mao felt Kojun was withholding key information. Both windows were in the same room, but the sisters' bedrooms were separate. She suddenly asked if this separate building was intended for guests. Kojun was surprised she guessed this. Seeing Mao Mao hesitant to speak further, Kojun pulled out something Jinshi had given her as a substitute for bezoar, since its demand was high: bear bile. Upon receiving the bear bile, Mao Mao hesitantly shared her thoughts. She placed 2 almonds by the windows to represent the sisters and then placed a mirror in front of the east window. The almond at the south window reflected in the mirror, creating the illusion of an additional almond. If the sisters had used a large mirror in a similar way, the observer, being far away and the sisters looking very similar, might not notice any abnormalities. allowing one sister to escape. The differences in embroidery could also be explained. Mao Mao drew a face on paper that looked happy when viewed correctly, but angry when turned upside down. Thus, the embroidery could also be an optical illusion. Mao Mao thought about the full-length mirror the envoys brought. If such a mirror were used, it could easily cause visual errors from a distance. She remembered her father, who had studied in the West, mentioning that embroidery was a hobby among upper-class women. Could the sisters have some connection to the envoys? Of course, that was not for Mao Mao to question. She was more concerned about what she could do with the bear bile. On the other side, Jinshi encountered trouble again and came to Mao Mao for help, asking if she had heard of a legendary beauty whose tears turned into pearls. Mao Mao almost wanted to suggest Jinshi look in the mirror, as he himself was quite a beauty. The rumor, however, came from an envoy who had often heard about this woman from her grandfather when she was young. She was described as a celestial beauty, whose dance would sprinkle blessings, and whose tears would turn into pearls, apparently a courtesan from the flower district. But considering her age, this moon fairy would now be an old woman. Thinking through the information, Mao Mao realized this was none other than the old madam from the green-blue house. However, the envoy was not interested in seeing the madam as she was now. Jinshi had already hosted a banquet with beautiful women, but the envoy scoffed at it. Mao Mao suggested letting the beautiful women accompany the envoy to sleep, but Jinshi then revealed the envoy was a woman. This made sense to Mao Mao. No wonder the envoy sought Jinshi, whose beauty could captivate anyone. Unfortunately, the lack of suitable companions remained an issue. Curious about the envoy's importance, Mao Mao learned that she controlled crucial trade locations between the West and the North, and the trade delegation was large because they wanted to discuss new trade matters. Seeing Jinshi so troubled, Mao Mao went to the old madam to inquire further. Proudly, the madam recounted an event from over 50 years ago, shortly after the capital had relocated and there was no palace ready to host guests. The emperor used the remnants of an old site, now the north side of the inner palace, and set up a stage where the old madam and other beauties performed dances. The old madam, a top courtesan, was chosen as the lead dancer, partially because of her tall stature. The emperor valued that banquet greatly, putting much effort into preparing, even calculating the phases of the moon and clearing any obstacles. The area was near an orchard, so it was necessary to meticulously remove all larvae from the leaves to prevent insects. Unfortunately, insects still got attracted by the lights, and someone tampered with the madam's dress, smearing it with insect remains. Luckily, she covered the stains with ribbons, and nobody noticed. The madam then showed Mao Mao a painting sent by the envoy's trade delegation afterward, depicting a woman of celestial beauty. Still, Mao Mao couldn't understand why the envoy insisted on calling her a goddess, even if the old madam was beautiful back then. She took the painting back to Jinshi, and at this point, they could only start by looking for tall beauties as depicted in the painting. Mao Mao had an idea. There was already a perfect candidate right in front of them. After choosing the beauties, Mao Mao went to the old site to look for clues. Unexpectedly, she encountered Shisui, who showed her a caterpillar he had just caught. This caterpillar would metamorphose into a moth, nocturnal and luminescent under moonlight, creating an enchanting effect. Initially dismissive, Mao Mao suddenly thought of the celestial woman from the rumors. She confirmed with Shisui that these moths would mate immediately after metamorphosing and that he could differentiate between the sexes. Mao Mao became excited and rallied everyone to search for these moths, then shared her plan with Jinshi. A few days later, a banquet was held at the palace for the foreign envoys, in the same north side courtyard where the Moonlight Fairy had appeared 50 years ago. The high-ranking consorts and officials attended, but they all stayed in carriages, a strategy devised to prevent the envoys from drawing too much attention. Mao Mao hid in the bushes, observing that the two envoys looked very similar and were exceptionally beautiful, exuding a confidence in their own beauty. They pulled the curtains up high, allowing the emperor to fully appreciate their looks. The party started, but the envoys seemed disinterested. Suddenly, one of them stepped out of the carriage and walked directly to the emperor, seeking a closer conversation, and mentioned the emperor's brother. Mao Mao realized the envoys intended a marriage alliance. However, before the emperor could respond, the envoy was persuaded by her sister to return to the carriage. Mao Mao felt that the envoys likely had little interest in the Moon Fairy and were merely confirming that no one else in the world was more beautiful than them. Their gift of mirrors to the 4 high-ranking consorts was probably just a provocation. However, these were not Mao Mao's concerns. As the banquet was ending, she hurried to check on Jinxi's preparations in a nearby room. With everything ready, she blindfolded Jinxi and personally escorted him to the path the envoys would take back. As the carriage stopped, she quickly lifted the blindfold. A stunning beauty appeared before everyone, with Jinxi, dressed as a woman, dancing elegantly under the moonlight surrounded by myriad glowing lights, perfectly recreating the scene the envoy's grandfather had witnessed. The 2 haughty female envoys were stunned. After the dance, the moon fairy vanished suddenly. One envoy, disregarding her image, rushed over and shook Mao Mao, who simply pointed at the moon and spoke the name of their country's moon goddess. After the moon fairy performance concluded perfectly, it likely left a lasting impression on the envoys. The pale light points were actually the adult moths Shisui had found. The old madam had mentioned that her dress was smeared with insect remains, and some insects emit scents to attract mates. The male insects, attracted by the scent, gathered around her, making her appear as a moonlight fairy surrounded by light points. Unfortunately, only a few could witness such a beautiful scene, as such beauty could potentially destabilize a nation. Jinxi seemed quite upset. After the dance, he jumped into the river wearing his heavy costume and silently swam to the other side of the pool, creating the illusion of the moon fairy's sudden disappearance. Nonetheless, they managed to satisfy the 2 envoys. Mao Mao dutifully dried Jinxi's hair. The next day, Mao Mao met Karan in the inner palace. Karan was heading to a calligraphy class while Mao Mao found a shady spot to idle. There wasn't much work for her at the Jade Palace, and the quack doctor was likely overwhelmed due to being involved in the essential oils incident. Regarding this incident, it hadn't fully concluded yet. Jinxi still hadn't figured out who brought the oils into the palace, knowing only that each palace had purchased a large quantity. They had to dispose of the toxic part for now. The 2 envoys were the current suspects, as they seemed keen on seizing the consort's positions, but ultimately, such lack of restraint didn't match their personalities. Mao Mao couldn't help but start analyzing. There were 4 high-ranking consorts in the palace. Considering the power of their natal families, Lulan consort should be the most valued, her father having been a favored minister since the previous emperor's reign. Next was Rifahi consort, a relative of the emperor, with little ambition for competition. Rishu consort's family had risen in status only in recent generations. Unfortunately, the emperor preferred voluptuous women and had never favored her. Lastly, Gyokuyuhi consort, the emperor's favorite, came from a homeland in the west that seemed prosperous due to trade, but was actually quite barren. Gyokuyuhi consort had been the victim of 2 failed poison attempts. Although it was likely that the perpetrator who tried to poison Gyokuyuhi consort, then pregnant with a princess, was a mid-ranking consort who died in a recent mushroom poisoning incident, how did a mid-ranking consort acquire such knowledge of poisons? Mao Mao then thought of Suire, but then she wondered, what did all these matters have to do with her? A poison tester. Mao Mao tossed aside a twig and decided to find something else to do to change her mood. On her way, she encountered maids from the Crystal Palace, who all ran away at the sight of her, except for Shin, who remained dignified. She was the only maid in the Crystal Palace who hadn't used the perfumed oils, possibly just because she didn't like them. After returning to the Jade Palace, Mao Mao discovered that Iron had caught a cold. She went to make cold medicine for her. However, to avoid infecting consort Gyokuyuhi, Iron took Mao Mao to the infirmary after taking her medicine. This place was staffed by older palace maids, one of whom checked Iron and confirmed there were no serious issues, so she advised her to stay for isolation. Mao Mao was surprised. This was her first time learning about such a facility in the inner palace. The maid here seemed to have more experience than the mediocre doctors, and the strong smell of alcohol indicated continuous cleaning, making it a suitable place for recuperation. The maid took Aaron to an isolation room and urged Mao Mao to get back to work. As Mao Mao left, she took a moment to look around. On her way back, she bumped into Jinxi. Mao Mao took the opportunity to ask why he didn't convert the infirmary into a proper hospital. Unfortunately, it wasn't that simple because only males could serve as medical officers. Minor injuries were manageable, but more severe injuries had to be handled by medical officers, who were also the only ones allowed to make medicine. Mao Mao couldn't help but ask about her own situation. Jinchi said he would turn a blind eye to her activities, but he wouldn't do the same for others. He also mentioned they hoped to recruit medical officers in different ways, wishing that eunuchs could serve in these roles. Mao Mao remembered that the current emperor had banned the castration surgery for becoming a eunuch after his accession, foreseeing a future shortage of talent. Considering Jinchi's age, she guessed his surgery was probably done just before the ban, which she thought was quite unfortunate. Jinchi, unaware of Mao Mao's thoughts, reminded her before leaving not to let others know she could make medicine. Yet, that very night, the maid at the infirmary asked Aaron if the maid who accompanied her was secretly making medicine. Mao Mao's ability to treat illnesses was eventually discovered. A palace maid specifically asked Aaron to relay a message, hoping Mao Mao would come over. After Gyokuyuhi ensured there was no malice, she let Sakura take Mao Mao there. Upon close observation, Mao Mao realized this maid named Shenryu seemed to be from the western regions. She wanted Mao Mao's help in preparing medicine for a servant maid in Rifahi's Crystal Palace. This was like sending Mao Mao into a dangerous situation. However, Mao Mao didn't immediately refuse, but asked for more details. The servant often came to the laundry area, but since the arrival of a merchant caravan, she had been experiencing fatigue and low fever, followed by coughing. Shenryu advised her to rest, but since then, she hadn't returned. The head maid of the Crystal Palace, a strict woman named Shin, likely rejected the maid's request for medical treatment. It had been half a month since then, and Shenryu was really worried, so she asked for Mao Mao's help. According to Shenryu's description, an epidemic couldn't be ruled out, so Mao Mao couldn't just stand by. At that moment, she spotted a gecko in the bushes, rushed to catch it but only managed to grab its tail. Mao Mao wanted to use it to make a regenerative medicine for Jinchi, needing to research why a gecko's severed tail could regrow. In the Crystal Palace, the sick maid was locked alone in a small dark room, coughing up blood. Some kind-hearted maids wanted to visit her but were stopped by Shin. Just then, a quack doctor arrived with Mao Mao in disguise, showing Shin a letter which grudgingly allowed them entry. The doctor, feeling guilty, praised Shin as an excellent maid. Shin arrogantly mentioned that the maids of the Crystal Palace were from noble families, fully qualified to serve the emperor. Her words hinted at dissatisfaction with Rifahi, who had been educated alongside her but had become a consort while she remained a maid. While passing the courtyard, Mao Mao noticed a small hut which Shin claimed was just a storage room. Mao Mao also spotted a flower by the wall she had never seen before. No longer hiding her identity, she pointed out that Shin had applied scented oil. While Shin was distracted, the doctor rushed to the hut and found the dying maid inside. Mao Mao immediately put on a face mask, instructed the doctor to prepare hot water, and began treating the maid. Shin wasn't alarmed. She had isolated the patient fearing contagion, and after all, it was just a servant maid. Her death wouldn't matter much. But Mao Mao smelled a fragrance in the room, causing Shin to panic. However, Mao Mao had already opened a box filled with banned merchandise from the caravan, enough to make abortion drugs. This involved the safety of the consorts and concubines, so Mao Mao and the doctor immediately reported to Jinchi. After changing clothes, they faced Rifahi with Jinchi questioning Shin, who remained silent. Mao Mao noticed that she and Rifahi had similar looks. They were cousins. With such looks and family background, becoming a mid-level consort wouldn't be a problem. Finally, Shin spoke but feigned ignorance about the items in the storage room, shifting the blame to Mao Mao for rummaging through another palace's belongings without clear intentions. Moreover, since anyone could access that room and the servant maid was delirious, who could prove she hadn't placed the items there? Mao Mao was rarely angry, but she mocked Shin for her sudden thoughtfulness, pointing out that Shin had never used scented oil before. It was likely that she had only acquired the scent when she went to check on the maid's illness. Mao Mao pulled out a bottle of scented oil from the box, identical to the one on Shin, and wanted to test publicly whether its fragrance was strong enough to seep through the bamboo scent. Angered, Shin slapped Mao Mao. Finally, Rifahi could no longer watch this farce and declared she would handle the matter. If Shin truly intended to make abortion drugs, that would amount to conspiring to murder the emperor's heirs. Rifahi, touching her stomach, clearly knew whom Shin aimed to harm. She knew Shin never saw her as a consort or fit to be the mother of the country. This attitude instantly enraged Shin, who dared to strike Rifahi in front of Jinchi and others. She finally burst out, arguing that despite her superior education and manners, Everyone favored Rifahi. Mona sarcastically commented from the side that it might be because Rifahi had a bigger chest. Shin continued to rant about her qualifications to be the mother of the country. In a frenzy, she picked up the box, intending to throw it at Rifahi, but fortunately, Kojun intervened in time. Mona accused Shin of claiming to love the emperor when, in reality, she only coveted the position of the empress consort. In this regard, Rifahi was superior. Rifahi then slapped Shin, stating that such a grave mistake by a maid warranted her immediate dismissal. If a slap wasn't enough, she'd use a fist, effectively asking Jinshi to let her handle Shin's punishment. Jinshi reluctantly agreed, and Shin was eventually banned forever from entering the imperial harem, lucky to keep her life. For Shin, it was a great disgrace, and she was powerless to retaliate after being expelled. After the incident, Jinshi noticed the scratches on Mao Mao's face and gave her a silk handkerchief to wipe it. Mao Mao felt it a pity to use such fine silk. She hadn't initially realized the servant maid would be locked in a storage room. She just noticed the 2 white flowers there, which were usually red. Someone had likely chosen them specifically because the green and white combination is considered beneficial for health in feng shui. Ironically, the white powder from the fruit of these flowers could also be used to make abortion drugs, though harmless if the method is unknown. Yet, how did Shin know the scented oil could be made into abortion drugs? Was the person who told her still in the harem? Mao Mao couldn't be sure. After sending Jinshi and Kojin away, the little maid who had wanted to visit the servant girl hurried to learn from Mao Mao about her condition. She was relieved to hear that Rifahi had already paid for her medical care. The emperor, visiting the Crystal Palace that night, also heard about Mao Mao's deeds. Jinshi dreamed again of his childhood, seeing an old man coming to find him, stopped by his royal mother. Then an old woman took the old man away. Jinshi later learned the old man was his father and the old woman his grandmother. The man he had always thought was his father was actually his brother. Jinshi hoped Mao Mao would realize his true identity, yet he feared it too. During the day, Mao Mao was caught secretly listening to a teacher's lecture. The teacher was explaining the history of the nation to the palace maids, mentioning that long ago, different ethnic groups lived in the country without a ruler. A noble woman from afar came and bore the child of heaven, the first emperor. She, known for her sharp eyesight that could see on moonless nights, was later revered as the Empress Dowager. Jinshi approached Mao Mao, pleased to see over 20 maids attending the school. He greeted Mao Mao and then left. Mao Mao was there to pick up Quran from school. While Quran was asking the teacher questions, Mao Mao's attention was drawn to a slender building outside with closely spaced pillars, indicating many small rooms inside. The teacher explained that the temple was built by the indigenous people. The Empress Dowager had told her son that one must pass through this temple to rule the land, and only those who chose the correct path could govern. However, the temple had not been used for decades because the previous emperor's brothers had all died of an epidemic, and there was no need to select who would be emperor. The teacher was delighted that someone was interested in the temple. The last interested person was the former royal physician, whom Mao Mao realized must have been her adoptive father. It seemed her adoptive father and the old man might have known each other. In the evening, after Mao Mao tested the emperor and Gyokuyuhi's food for poison and was about to leave, the emperor stopped her. He asked her to accompany him to a place, which turned out to be the temple of choice. Jinshi was also there, and the temple's manager was the teacher from earlier, who spoke quite bluntly to the emperor, asking whom he intended to bring inside. The emperor decided to take Jinshi and Mao Mao. Inside, they saw 3 doors of different colors. A sign warned against entering the red door. The emperor had previously chosen green, so this time he picked blue. Inside were 3 more doors, with a warning against the brown door. The emperor chose green again. They continued this pattern, wandering around the temple. Mao Mao was confused by all the walking. At the last choice, the sign warned against the blue door. The emperor chose yellow, but unfortunately, it led to a dead end. The wall read, "O son of the king, but not of the Empress Dowager." The emperor sighed, realizing he couldn't discern the divine will, just like last time. An old eunuch comforted him, noting that since the temple was sealed in the harem, only he remained as its manager, and the divine will had little meaning. However, Mao Mao's curiosity was piqued. The emperor had followed the signs but hadn't reached the correct answer. Could there be another intention? The old eunuch then remarked that her adoptive father could surely solve this puzzle. Mao Mao's competitive spirit was ignited. She knew her adoptive father's medical knowledge was exceptional. Could the choice also relate to medicine? Suddenly, she recalled the old eunuch's story about the nation's founding. The story focused on the first emperor's mother, the Empress Dowager, and omitted the emperor's father. This suggested that the nation valued maternal lineage but practiced patrilineal succession. Mao Mao asked Jinshi if all the previous emperor's brothers were born of the same mother. The emperor responded that not all were, but the mothers of the princes who bore sons were sisters. Mao Mao then asked the crucial question, whether most emperors had poor eyesight. The emperor confirmed this, noting that the previous emperor had good vision. Mao Mao immediately understood and wanted to go back in, but the old eunuch said she was not qualified as she was neither a consort nor a princess. The emperor jokingly offered to make her his consort, which shocked Jinshi, but it was just a joke. Instead, he let Jinshi take her in. Once inside, they faced the first choice of doors. Like the emperor, Mao Mao chose the blue door, but the second time, she chose aqua. Eventually, they reached the 10th choice, where the hint was to choose the red door. However, there was no red door among the three present. Mao Mao confidently chose green, which surprisingly led to the correct path. Traditionally, a new emperor had to stand there and swear an oath to the people. If no one chose the correct path, a consort who could find it would be brought along. The rightful heir was supposed to make the choice, but Mao Mao figured it out using her intelligence, unrelated to lineage. The emperor asked Mao Mao to explain to everyone. The story said the Empress Dowager could see in the dark. Those chosen by the temple, meaning those with her bloodline, actually could not accurately identify colors. Specifically, they were red-green colorblind. The first choice they faced had blue, red, and green doors, with a warning against the red door. Thus, choosing blue or green was correct, but the Empress Dowager's son would always choose blue, as they couldn't distinguish red from green. The subsequent choices followed a similar logic. If you couldn't tell brown from green, you would use elimination to choose aqua. The last instruction to enter the red door, if one could correctly identify white and purple, would lead one to assume the remaining door was red. Furthermore, those with red-green color blindness typically have excellent night vision, aligning with the Empress Dowager's trait. Thus, only those inheriting her characteristics could pass this test. Originally, the Empress Dowager came from the western regions and settled by marrying the local ruler, making her the nation's ancestress, while maintaining male succession to save face for the local rulers. However, her lineage did not want their bloodline to die out, so they devised a way to continue it. If no princes had her traits, someone from a lineage close to hers would be made a consort, gradually integrating her bloodline into the nation's core. The original rulers were then removed from the story, elevating the Empress Dowager as the progenitor. Once everyone who knew the truth passed away, the revised story became the truth, a peaceful yet lengthy method of changing the dynasty. The old eunuch suggested considering incorporating this clever girl's bloodline to dilute the overly concentrated royal bloodline, but the emperor wasn't interested and didn't want to oppose Mao Mao's adoptive father. Moreover, there were other reasons he hadn't mentioned yet. This discussion also led Mao Mao to start questioning Jinshi's true identity. Mao Mao was surprisingly sent to live in the warehouse because she had scared Sakura into fainting by showing her a gecko's severed tail. After waking up, Sakura complained, fearing that Mao Mao would eventually be expelled from her room by the head maid, Hanyan. Unexpectedly, Mao Mao was very pleased with the idea, as the warehouse was much larger than her current room and offered more privacy. She promptly went to ask Hanyan for permission, which was granted. However, since the incident with Sakura, Mao Mao stopped collecting such things. Rumors about a strange maid laughing while catching bugs were probably about Shisui. To prevent Shisui from affecting others, Mao Mao asked Karan about Shisui's whereabouts. Karan didn't know and asked other maids, who were wary of Mao Mao. She then used a scarf Jinshi had given her as a reward for information about Shisui. The maids, recognizing the scent of the scarf as belonging to a high-ranking official, eagerly provided information. Mao Mao found Shisui in a forest, which also had white arsenic flowers, reminding her of her childhood when she and the courtesan sisters collected these seeds to make abortion drugs. Xin was trying to replace Princess Li Hua with without coming into contact with essential oils that could cause miscarriage, yet she used them to make abortion drugs, a contradiction in her behavior. The courtesan women used other common plants like garden balsam and peony, which were readily available in the palace, whereas Shin had to procure materials through traders, showing her lack of medicinal knowledge. Who then had taught her to make the abortion drugs? While pondering this in the forest, Shisui suddenly appeared, and when a bug landed on Mao Mao, Shisui swatted it away. After washing her hair, Shisui shared her findings enthusiastically. They then heard a strange noise and discovered it was the Empress Dowager, who appeared much younger than expected. Shisui told Mao Mao that the Empress Dowager had established the infirmary and had proposed abolishing the eunuch and slave systems. While abolishing slavery was humane, if it meant living like courtesans, the difference was hard to discern. Back in the Pomegranate Palace, Mao Mao was kept busy by Hanyin, especially strict today due to the Empress Dowager's visit. Yokuyuhi seemed to have a good relationship with the Empress Dowager, more like friends despite an age difference. The Empress Dowager, having heard of Mao Mao from a maid at the infirmary, seemed eager to speak with her privately, prompting Yokuyuhi to find an excuse to leave with the princess. The Empress Dowager acknowledged Mao Mao's resolution of many issues in the palace and asked for her help in investigating whether a curse had been placed on the former emperor. According to rumors Mao Mao heard, the former emperor was a weak ruler and a puppet of the empress. He also had a preference for young girls, frequently marrying young brides. The Empress Dowager has a scar on her abdomen from when she had to have a cesarean section because her body was not fully developed when giving birth to the current emperor. Mao Mao's foster father had undergone castration surgery specifically to assist the Empress Dowager during childbirth. Fortunately, the current emperor grew up healthy, and the Empress Dowager later successfully gave birth to another prince, who was only a year older than Mao Mao and much younger than his elder brother. Mao Mao dared not ponder whether this younger brother was truly the son of the former emperor. A few days later, the Empress Dowager hosted a gathering for the 4 senior consorts. Yokuyuhi's pregnancy was an open secret. However, such face-to-face tea parties could be opportunities for probing for information, most likely by consort Lulan. Aside from her overly lavish attire, there seemed to be no rumors about consort Lulan. At that moment, Mao Mao was called away by Hanyin, who told her that her services for testing poison were not needed today, as the Empress Dowager needed her help with something else. Naturally, Hanyin did not inquire about the details, but reminded Mao Mao not to do anything that would betray Yokuyuhi. Mao Mao, frightened by being cornered, quickly assured that she did not want to become Hanyin's enemy, and then went to find the maid arranged by the Empress Dowager. The place was a former part of the palace, no longer in use, but still immaculately clean, with a beautifully maintained courtyard. The maid led Mao Mao to a room that was off limits to everyone, which emitted a strange smell upon opening. During the reign of the emperor 2 generations back, this room was occupied by a palace maid who became a junior consort. It was the empress's room and the room where the former emperor was conceived and also died. The maid then closed the door and took Mao Mao to another room to talk. She told Mao Mao that in his later years, the former emperor often stayed in that room with his mother, known as the Empress, as if immersed in memories. After the Empress died, the emperor also passed away in that same room, although given his age, it could be considered a natural death. However, the Empress Dowager always felt she had cursed him because she wished for his death every night. Moreover, after the emperor's death, his body was placed in the ancestral temple for a year as per tradition and showed no signs of decay when buried the following year, looking as if he had just passed away. In contrast, the body of the empress, who died around the same time, had decomposed beyond recognition. Thus, the Empress Dowager believed she had cursed the former emperor. The building was soon to be demolished, and the Empress Dowager hoped Mao Mao could investigate before then. Mao Mao agreed immediately and then made her own request. What secrets were hidden in the former emperor's room? Mao Mao stayed in the maid Suiren's room for the past few days to investigate. She also asked a senior maid for permission to enter that room. The maid said she would need to ask the Empress Dowager for permission. That evening, Mao Mao saw Suiren reading by lamplight and was encouraged to pick a book herself. Surprisingly, all the books were romance stories, which amused Mao Mao since she didn't expect the old lady to enjoy such things. During her search, Mao Mao noticed a box and was about to open it when Suiren caught her. However, Suiren didn't scold her. Instead, she revealed that the box contained toys favored by Jinshi. Curious, Suiren asked Mao Mao what she thought of Lord Jinshi. Mao Mao responded without hesitation that he was a good boss, especially since he provided her with valuable medicinal herbs. However, those who had watched Jinshi grow up knew he was very faithful, always fixating on something to the extent that his servants would hide it, because his status didn't allow such obsessions. Despite their reluctance, they needed to help him mature, fulfilling his mother's wish. Mao Mao began to understand why Jinshi sometimes showed a childish side. Perhaps it was part of his nature. She then pulled out a painting, but Suiren quickly took it away, saying it was supposed to be discarded. Mao Mao picked up a yellow stone, which Jinshi had found as a child, but it was quickly confiscated. Now, Mao Mao informed Suiren that the stone was poisonous. Combining this with what she had seen in the room, she realized that Jinshi had entered the inner court as a child. The next step was to find proof. The following day, Mao Mao accompanied the Empress Dowager and Jinshi back to the room. This time she was allowed to enter. The pungent smell was still present. Mao Mao noticed a paintbrush on the floor and asked the Empress Dowager if the former emperor had a hobby of painting. The Empress Dowager confirmed he did paint for her once, but urged her to keep it secret, as knowing others might prevent him from painting. Mao Mao continued to look around. Knowing that the former emperor spent time in this room attended only by a mute servant, she asked for the servant to be brought over. She then inspected the brush, fragments, and stains on the floor. Noticing more stains near the wall, Mao Mao touched the wall and found it soft, as if many layers of paper had been pasted over it. She had nearly unraveled the curse's mystery. If she peeled off the papers, she might uncover a secret she wasn't particularly interested in. Soon, the mute servant was brought in, but he was uncooperative. Following his gaze back to the wall, she asked if there was something on it. Without waiting for his response, she asked the Empress Dowager for permission to tear off the wallpaper since the room was to be demolished soon. The Empress Dowager allowed it. Mao Mao moistened the wallpaper and carefully tore it down, revealing a painting of a court lady. The painting was well done. The color on the central figure's clothing was made from crushed realgar, a mineral containing the same toxins as arsenic, which has preserving properties. This explained the mystery of the former emperor's incorrupt body. While painting, the arsenic toxins from the realgar entered his body and were present throughout at his death, revealing a part of his past. The former emperor, though a sovereign, loved painting, which was considered unseemly. He kept this secret and only allowed the mute servant to manage the room. After tearing off one wallpaper, the wall remained soft, possibly hiding many more of his passionate artworks. Someone must have been secretly providing him with painting supplies, likely the Empress, the woman in the painting. Knowing her son lacked the capabilities of a ruler, she took control to protect him, resorting to any means necessary to protect her son, giving him this room and the supplies, unaware of the deadly toxins in the paint. Mao Mao uncovered the secret and resolved the Empress Dowager's emotional turmoil. She stared long at the women in the painting, questioning the deceased emperor if she was among them. She quickly dismissed the thought, realizing she was just a fleeting presence in the emperor's life. Her position as the nation's mother was secured only by the scar on her abdomen. Before being favored, the Empress Dowager already knew of the emperor's preferences. Her body matured early, and her father exploited her as a tool. As a maid to a middle-ranking concubine, her naive elder sister, who knew nothing of such dirty matters, had hopeful expectations for the handsome emperor. However, when she tried to touch him, she was harshly rebuffed. The emperor appeared weak, pitiful, and nearly brought to tears, prompting the Empress Dowager to approach him. In that moment, the emperor's gaze fixated on her, and she later became pregnant with his child, surviving many dangers to give birth. The Empress recognized her grandson. Mao Mao's foster father was castrated and stayed in the inner palace to assist her childbirth, because previously, concubines falsely claimed to carry the emperor's child, only to be found carrying the child of a physician. Therefore, physicians wanting to remain in the inner palace had to accept castration. Years passed, the Empress Dowager no longer appeared young, and the emperor stopped visiting. The inner palace grew, continuously filled with young girls bearing the same fate. One day she brushed past the emperor in the courtyard, watching him speaking kindly to a young girl. filled with resentment for being forgotten by such a man. That night, she forced herself into the emperor's room, tormenting him to leave a lasting impression. Afterward, the emperor spiraled into madness, locking himself in that room, likely painting portraits of the empress mother and unambitious young girls. But he only painted the empress dowager once. She treasured that painting but later instructed Suiren to discard it. She didn't need the painting, just as the emperor didn't need her. Leaving the room, Jinshi was waiting outside. He asked the empress dowager if the emperor had ever come looking for them, mentioning the real Gar stone he found as a child, which Suiren had just returned to him that morning. The empress dowager, noting Jinshi's profile resembling the emperor's, cherished him even though his origins might be considered unethical, or if he was switched at birth. Jinshi had seen the painting as a child, and perhaps picked up the stone because it reminded him of the painting. The empress dowager used to wear clothes of that yellow color as a child. Maybe the woman in yellow in the painting could indeed be her. The empress dowager did not linger on this topic, instead shifting the focus to Jinshi, commenting on the maid he was interested in, and advising him to keep his interests hidden. Otherwise, they might be hidden from him as well. The Jade Palace recently welcomed new maids, 3 sisters who look very alike and are from Sakura's hometown. The eldest, Haku, is the same age as Lady Gyokuyuhi. The middle sister is named Koku, and the youngest, Sekyu. To help Mao Mao, who struggles with face blindness, distinguish them, each sister wears a hairband matching the color of her name. Mao Mao is most concerned about staying in the storeroom forever, but Hanyan disagrees and scolded both Mao Mao and Sakura before complaining to Lady Gyokuyuhi. However, the lady is always lenient with Mao Mao and allowed her to use the storeroom, though she must sleep in her regular room. Mao Mao was grateful. After the sisters arrived, each maid had fewer tasks since Lady Gyokuyuhi was pregnant, and there was also a prominent consort, Lulan. This was to maintain balance. Mao Mao, uninterested in these matters, spent her time after work grinding medicines in the storeroom. Sakura thought this was not good, and that Mao Mao should spend some time getting to know the new maids. Mao Mao knew it was well intended but got tricked into going to the north side of the harem with Sakura one evening. Before they arrived, Sakura gave Mao Mao a white cloth to wear over her head and then knocked on the door of a small hut. A beautiful maid welcomed them, explaining that the building was used during the previous emperor's era, but now housed fewer maids, making it suitable for their purpose. They entered a small room already filled with maids wearing white cloths and sitting in a circle, each with a candle in front of them. The beautiful maid, acting as the host, asked if everyone was ready with their stories and announced the enjoyment of 13 chilling tales for the evening. It turned out to be a ghost story session. The storytelling maids were very expressive, scaring Sakura so much that she clung to Mao Mao. They took turns telling ghost stories, blowing out their candles after each tale. The stories were mostly rumors from the harem and not particularly spine-chilling. Mao Mao was getting sleepy until she realized she was sitting next to Shisui, who shared some snacks with her. The next storyteller diverged from palace rumors to tales of her hometown, about a forest so ancient that entering it was forbidden due to curses and evil spirits devouring souls. One year, due to a poor harvest, a child entered the forest for food, leading to the ostracism of the child and mother by their village. The villagers saw a light entering their home the night they grew excessively thin, and the next day, the village chief found the child dead, and the mother dying with a strange smile, claiming she had good news that she died before sharing. The forest remained forbidden. Mao Mao, not surprised, yawned, noting the room's risk of carbon monoxide poisoning due to its small size and the burning charcoal. Then it was Shisui's turn. She told a tale from a distant eastern land about a monk who sought shelter in an old house on his way back from a funeral, unable to cross a mountain before dark. The house was inhabited by a couple. The wife was hospitable, and the monk recited scriptures in gratitude but heard them arguing. The wife wished to replace her loneliness with the monk, frightening him into continuous prayer. However, she did not see him and eventually attacked her husband instead, devouring him completely. The monk continued his recitation until the sound stopped, then ventured outside to find only insect wings scattered about, continuing his chants until dawn. Captivated by Shisui's story, Mao Mao stared at her face, feeling a sense of familiarity. Next, it was Mao Mao's turn. She told a story from her foster father about a graveyard rumored to be haunted, only to be debunked as a man with a torch walking by. a grave robber obsessed with a mysterious curse who opened a grave to extract a liver rumored to cure all illnesses. Sakura quickly stopped Mao Mao from continuing. Her own story was mundane. Finally, the beautiful maid spoke, but Mao Mao was puzzled as there had been mention of 13 stories, yet only 12 people were present. The maid's tale was about the previous emperor's era, when the harem expanded as the empress gathered young girls to satisfy the late emperor's preferences. These girls were not allowed to leave the harem, and despite the story's intrigue, everyone, including Mao Mao, felt sleepy. At that moment, the beautiful maid mentioned that one of the young girls had become pregnant. She pleaded with the former emperor, but was still not allowed to leave the harem. As she lay dying, she left behind the words, "Now it's your turn." These words instantly woke Mao Mao up. She immediately stood and opened the window to ventilate the room, taking deep breaths of fresh air. She then urged Shisui and Sakura to help the other maids, who were becoming groggy, to the window or door, as the charcoal embers had filled the room with harmful gases. Fortunately, Mao Mao's quick thinking meant that everyone was safe. Just then, she heard the beautiful maid murmuring behind her, "I was so close." But when Mao Mao turned around, the maid had disappeared. After the event, Mao Mao and Sakura returned to the Jade Palace. Shisui caught up with them, eager to know more about the Forbidden Forest story. Mao Mao shared her theory that the notion of a cursed forest was merely superstition. However, the forest being off-limits might have some basis, as it contained many inedible species. Outsiders who ate food from the forest fell ill, and over time, these incidents evolved into a taboo. The story's mother and child, desperate for food, entered the forest at dusk. They collected food, including a type of mushroom called moonlight mushroom, which is toxic and glows in the dark. The mother carrying these glowing mushrooms was mistaken by villagers for a ghost. Perhaps on her deathbed, she intended to tell the villagers about the delicious mushrooms in the forest, as a form of revenge on those who had ostracized them. Shisui had a moment of clarity and quickly bid farewell to Mao Mao. When Mao Mao and Sakura arrived back at the Jade Palace, Hanyan asked how they felt about the event. Upon hearing that there were complications, she remarked that it was expected since the event was organized by someone unfamiliar. It turned out that the previous organizer had died last year, and it was unclear who had taken over. The previous organizer had once been favored by the former emperor, but never left the harem. The gathering was her only joy, and fortunately, someone was willing to continue hosting it. Hearing this, Sakura was terrified, noting the similarity to the story told by the beautiful maid. Could it be that the story was also the maid's own experience or a prank by someone in the know? Mao Mao recalled the beautiful maid's mention of 13 stories. If not for her timely realization, they might have become the 13th story. That night, a frightened Sakura clung to Mao Mao, insisting they sleep together, while the poor Jinshi was left to drink alone, trying to alleviate his loneliness. Recently, Jinshi has become increasingly impatient. Both the Emperor and the Empress Dowager have been subtly urging him to seize happiness and to be with Mao Mao. He is scheduled to leave the palace for a journey tomorrow and plans to use this trip to reveal his true identity to Mao Mao. Naturally, he wants Mao Mao to accompany him. He immediately went with Kojun to the Jade Palace to ask Empress Gyokuyuhi to let Mao Mao go with him for a few days. The Empress was reluctant to agree, stating that Mao Mao was already her person and should not be returned, but rather borrowed. Nonetheless, she consented but inquired about Jinshi's purpose for the trip. Jinshi explained that Lord Shisho had invited him to go hunting. Gyokuyuhi playfully teased Jinshi, asking why he only referred to her as she, instead of directly saying Mao Mao's name. Jinshi, who had never actually called Mao Mao by her name, appeared visibly restless, which amused Gyokuyuhi. The next day, Mao Mao joined Jinshi's caravan as they set off for the northern land of Zibei province. Inside the carriage, Basen was explaining the region to Mao Mao, but she wasn't really listening. She was aware that the hunting event was a grand affair with many prominent guests, including Jinshi and Kojun. Since Kojun was invited, his son Basen took his place as the assistant officer. Although Kojun was a eunuch, he was not born without genitals. It was common for men his age to have children. They had now entered Zibei province, known for its high terrain and cool climate, once a summer retreat of the former emperor and currently managed by Lord Shisho's family. Jinshi and his group were accommodated in a large house, but the room was very stuffy. Jinshi wore only a thin shirt and asked Basen to refer to him as Lord Kosen outdoors. Mao Mao curiously asked why he changed the title, but Jinshi hesitated to explain. Basin realized that Mao Mao was unaware of Jinshi's real identity, and Kojin reminded him not to slip up, as Jinshi would tell her himself. Mao Mao ignored the father and son and busied herself with tasks. In the evening, while others attended a banquet outside, Jinshi and a few others stayed in, with the windows tightly shut, making Mao Mao feel unbearably hot. Soon, dinner was delivered. As a poison tester, Mao Mao had to taste the food first. The aperitif was sweet but strong, and the main dish was soft-shelled turtle, a table full of energy-boosting foods which Jinshi chose to ignore, opting for army rations instead. Mao Mao thought it wasteful and, with Jinshi's permission, started eating the dinner herself, even urging Jinshi to try some. Though Jinshi knew Mao Mao had no ulterior motive, he couldn't hide his excitement, which Kojin had to calm down. Basin also tried the wine, and became so stimulated that he got a nosebleed. Later, Kojin arranged a luxurious room for Mao Mao, complete with a bath, and the next day would be the hunting day. Meanwhile, a group of mysterious figures in black cloaks hid in the woods, plotting something, and they were armed with muskets. Early the next morning, they rode horses to the hunting site and set up camp in the mountains. Animals hunted later could be cooked and eaten on site. With nothing to do, Mao Mao sneaked out for a walk to see if she could find any herbs or mushrooms. Unexpectedly, she came across Reihaku petting a dog. Reihaku, who was also part of the security detail for the trip, had been assigned only to take care of the dogs. Mao Mao knew this was because he had been promoted too quickly, and others intentionally sidelined him. However, Reihaku seemed happy with his task and demonstrated to Mao Mao how, by blowing a whistle, the dogs could understand commands and come running from miles away. Mao Mao didn't want to stay outside too long, so she returned to join Jinshi at the banquet. Despite the hot weather, poor Jinshi had to wear a thick mask. Even without showing his handsome face, his presence at the high seat indicated he was the most prestigious guest there. Seated next to him was Lord Shisho, the father of Princess Lulan and the organizer of the hunt. Jinshi seemed to deliberately avoid eye contact with Lord Shisho, which Mao Mao found strange. Could it be because it was too hot? But Kojun shook his head at her, signaling her to do nothing until Jinshi weakly left his seat. Following Kojun's cue, Mao Mao picked up a gourd filled with salt and quickly followed Jinshi. She found him struggling to hold on and led him to a waterfall, where she used a handkerchief dipped in water to wipe his face. Finally alone, Jinshi wanted to use this moment to tell Mao Mao the truth. But before he could finish, gunshots rang out from the bushes. Fortunately, the shooter missed with 2 shots. Jinshi picked up Mao Mao and jumped off the waterfall. Jumping from such a height, their chances of survival were slim. The assailants above did not pursue them, unaware that Jinshi was an excellent swimmer. He led Mao Mao into a nearby cave and performed artificial respiration on her. Fortunately, Mao Mao was mostly unharmed after expelling the water, but felt uncomfortable being wet and didn't know when they could leave. To avoid catching cold, Mao Mao took off her clothes, and Jinshi did the same. However, Mao Mao showed no interest in his muscular physique and focused on the herbs she had with her, which were unfortunately wet. Only the pickles from the morning were still edible. Considering Jinshi's need for salt, eating them was a good idea. As Mao Mao checked his temperature, there was no hint of flirtation, yet Jinshi couldn't help but be drawn to her. They ate the pickles together, and then calmly discussed the attack. The assailants had weapons typically used only in warfare. The muskets required time to prepare between shots, yet they had fired twice in quick succession, suggesting there was more than one attacker. Why they wanted Jinshi dead, Mao Mao didn't ask. She just wanted to know how to leave. Jinshi told her there was a hole in the top of the cave that only Basin knew about, but he probably wouldn't remember it soon. As they stood at the cave entrance, Mao Mao tried whistling, but it was useless. Jinshi then suggested she climb up using his shoulders, but the walls were too slippery. Just as Mao Mao finally got a grip, a frog jumped onto her head. Trying to shake it off, she lost her balance, and both she and Jinshi fell to the ground. Mao Mao ended up lying on top of Jinshi, her hand on his chest while his arms were wrapped around her waist. Close together in this way, Mao Mao tried to get up but was pulled back by Jinshi. After Jinshi left the banquet, several high officials started gossiping about whether he went on a date with a maid. Meanwhile, Basin sent his subordinates to search, but so far, they have found nothing. 2 hours have passed, and Shisho, the host, does not seem worried. Does this imply he is not involved? On the other hand, Jinshi and Mao Mao are trapped in a cave. Mao Mao is lying on top of Jinshi, and her first reaction is to comment on how good he smells. Then, she feels something strange under her hand, bigger than the frog they encountered earlier. When she squeezes it, Jinshi blushes, asking Mao Mao to move her hand away as it arouses him. Mao Mao unconsciously squeezes again before realizing what it is. "You're a eunuch. How could you have this?" she exclaims, also noticing Jinshi's muscular chest, which is uncharacteristic of a eunuch. Jinshi, with a wry smile, sits up and embraces Mao Mao, wanting to reveal his true identity. But Mao Mao interrupts him, claiming she just squished a frog and insists it was a frog. As she tries to leave, Jinshi grabs her wrist. "What frog? I'm much bigger than a frog." In the midst of their argument about frogs and their slimy secretion, Jinshi, frustrated, pins Mao Mao down and challenges her to check further. He then lifts one of her legs, creating a tense moment. As Mao Mao debates kicking him, his kiss slowly approaches. Just before their lips touch, a noise comes from outside the cave. Mao Mao reacts first, whistling for a small white dog that jumps down and pins Jinshi. Mao Mao is saved, and soon, the dog's owner, Rahaku, arrives to help them out. They learn that an attack forced them to jump off a waterfall. Jinshi asks Reihaku if anyone brought firearms to the hunt, which Reihaku denies as firearms are unsuitable for forest hunting. It must have been an assassination attempt, but the guests, invited by Lord Shisho, wouldn't carry such weapons. Mao Mao tries to help Jinshi find the shooter, but Jinshi, still angry, ignores her. Mao Mao admits her mistake. She had criticized his size despite his usual confidence in his appearance. Nevertheless, she tells Jinshi that they should be able to find the person who fired the gun. The banquet continued elsewhere, while Reihaku suddenly presented Basen with a blood-stained scrap of cloth. Basen recognized it as belonging to Lord Jinshi. Reihaku reported in front of everyone that he found it in a crevice in the river, with no one around and only rapids ahead, suggesting the owner might have been swept away. This prompted an immediate search order from the high officials, with Basen joining in, though he suspected Jinshi had his own plans and was likely safe. At the riverbank, Basen's men found some arrows with eagle feathers. Then, a check of everyone's baggage revealed identical arrows in a high official's bag. The official, panicked, denied any knowledge, insisting it was a setup. He seemed genuine, and his subordinates showed no signs of irregularity. Reihaku then suggested searching the forest again, and Basen's team headed there, but someone had already rushed to the forest and was frantically digging at a clearing. However, the items were already taken by Mao Mao. When the person attacked in frustration, Reihaku easily subdued him. Jinshi then emerged, crediting the small dog for finding 3 firearms of a new model from the west hidden there. Jinshi fired one into the air, and the smell matched the gunpowder they had detected earlier. Thus, the scene Reihaku had staged earlier was merely to draw out the culprit. Basen arrived soon after, relieved to see Jinshi unharmed, bringing the incident to a temporary close with Jinshi taking over to handle the rest. The important guests returned to the resting villa, while Kojun remained at the banquet, officially representing Lord Jinshi. A colleague approached him, complaining about the Empress. Due to her anger, Kojun was forced to become a eunuch and abandon his family name to adopt Kojun. At the banquet, however, he was still regarded as a member of his original family. The drunken colleague then gossiped about another masked lord rumored to have severe burn scars, hence his mask. Unfortunately, that person remained secluded in his room that evening, likely concerning the emperor, as he was from the Eastern Palace. Kojun responded non-committally when asked about any concubines pregnant after the previous prince's death, keeping royal secrets. The banquet attendees speculated on the suitability of the emperor's brother, the main guest of the hunt, as a successor to the throne. It was unclear if Kojun managed to inform Mao Mao of this, as they could not afford to overlook utilizing Mao Mao's talents for potential future issues. At this moment, Mao Mao was in her room, reflecting on the day's events and linking them to past incidents in the imperial harem. However, these were not her concerns. As she was about to rest after closing the window, she heard Jinshi's voice outside, considerately telling her not to open the door, understanding she had been frightened enough for one day. Not facing Jinshi was perfect for Mao Mao, especially after the awkward things she had said today. Mao Mao has always struggled to read others' emotions, raised by courtesans who prioritized their work over her needs, so her tears were often ignored. This made her grow up into a child who rarely cried, and was somewhat insensitive to kindness or malice. Unsure what to say, she assured Jinshi she wouldn't speak of anything. To her, Lord Jinshi was simply Jinshi. She thought to herself, no matter whether he had that or not, it didn't matter. Jinshi, misinterpreting this, became thrilled, believing to Mao Mao, He is just him, and handed her a silken pouch, eager to share something important with her. However, Mao Mao was distracted as soon as she opened the pouch and saw the bezoar she had longed for, instantly opening the door to thank Jinshi personally. Jinshi, seeing her radiant smile, forgot what he was about to say. Caught off guard, Mao Mao returned to her room, locked the door, and delightedly examined the bezoar. She silently made a decision. She now owed Jinshi a debt as precious as the bezoar. If his secret ever led him into danger, she would ensure he became a true eunuch. Little did Mao Mao know, she harbored such rebellious thoughts about the future emperor. Recently, a handsome eunuch has arrived in the palace. It seems that Lord Jinshi might feel some pressure now. It appears that this person has some connection with Consort Lulan. Today, Mao Mao went to play with Karan. Karan asked her if she could recommend any good jobs, as she only has half a year left in her service in the palace. She needs to plan ahead. However, Mao Mao could only think of places like brothels. Although Karan is still naive, she is pretty and easy to train. The madam would surely welcome her, but Mao Mao couldn't just push her into that kind of place. Then, Shisui came to see them. Hearing that Karan was looking for a job, she took them to the bathhouse. Some of the consorts also bathe here. Of course, the higher-ranking consorts have their own private baths, so it's mostly the middle and lower-ranking consorts and the maids who come here. The three of them chose a less crowded area and changed clothes. It turned out that Shisui was quite attractive too. While bathing, Mao Mao contributed shampoo she got from the medical office, creating lots of bubbles on Karan's head, with Shisui also covered in bubbles. After cleaning up, they entered the bath to soak. Mao Mao asked Shisui about the connections she mentioned. Shisui then took them to a consort-only bath area. It turned out her connections involved giving massages to the consorts. Mao Mao guessed that this consort had probably not been favored yet. Otherwise, she wouldn't let a stranger touch her. Mao Mao noticed some hair on the consort's body that hadn't been cleaned off properly, so she went back to the changing room to fetch some thread, which can be used as a hair removal tool. She tried it first on the consort's maid. It was a bit painful, but more effective than a razor. After shaving, they applied scented oil to protect the skin. The consort decided to wait and see, asking when Mao Mao and the others would come next to schedule in advance. The three of them had excellent massage techniques, and soon there was a line forming. This was because a maid who often came for massages had fulfilled her service and left the palace. This maid was referred by a middle-ranking consort to work in her household. Besides finding connections, they also received some jewelry as thank-you gifts. Of course, only Shisui and Karan could do this kind of work. Mao Mao usually didn't have so much free time. As expected, when she returned, she was scolded by Hanyan. Surprisingly, Consort Gyokuyuhi didn't care at all and told Mao Mao she could continue to work on the side with her friends. If she heard anything interesting during the massages, she must tell her. Mao Mao realized that a big bathhouse was a great place for the palace women to gather and an excellent spot for gathering information. The news of Consort Gyokuyuhi's pregnancy hadn't been officially announced yet, but most people already knew. There were even whispers that Consort Rifahi and Consort Lolan were also pregnant. Mao Mao knew about Consort Rifahi and guessed Consort Lolan's condition due to her reduced outings and often wearing loose clothes. Consort Lolan is the daughter of the high official Lord Shisho and had entered the palace with great ceremony as a high-ranking consort. The emperor surely wouldn't neglect her. Now, 3 of the 4 high-ranking consorts were pregnant, leaving only the young consort Rishu. Besides rumors about the consorts, they also heard that among the 30 eunuchs who recently arrived, one was very handsome. Mao Mao was puzzled. She thought castration had been abolished. How could there be new eunuchs? Well-informed Shisui told her that these people were previously slaves from foreign tribes, and in some places, foreigners are castrated to be used as slaves. These people must have escaped or been rescued. Shisui just wanted to know what the handsome eunuch looked like, though he surely couldn't compare to Lord Jinshi. Mao Mao suddenly shivered. Shisui, who was always inquisitive, asked if she often worked with Lord Jinshi. Mao Mao quickly explained that they just worked together on matters for the consorts. Then she remembered the texture of something she touched the other day, trying to convince herself it was just a frog. At that moment, she noticed Consort Rishu and her maid at the large bathhouse. Later, Mao Mao was called away by 3 new sisters from the Pomegranate Palace. The eldest, Haku, directly asked her why the suspicious Consort Gyokuyuhi trusted her so much. After a moment, Mao Mao realized she had accidentally spoken Consort Gyokuyuhi's name directly, but this also showed they had a good relationship. Mao Mao explained that she was just a responsible poison tester. Haku didn't ask further, and shifted the conversation to her younger sister, Sekyu. The 3 sisters were still not used to the palace life, and Sekyu, being the same age as Mao Mao, felt very lonely with Mao Mao always running outside. So, Mao Mao invited Sekyu to join them at the bathhouse today. The two elder sisters were relieved and told Sekyu to treat this as part of her duties and gain some experience by going with Mao Mao. But once Sekyu arrived, she almost became a plaything for Karan and Shisui. Naturally, Sekyu also joined them in giving massages to everyone. But she is naturally shy and even embarrassed to undress. She had never been to the large bathhouse before and always used the bath in the Pomegranate Palace, borrowed from consort Gyokuyuhi. Initially unfamiliar with massage work, Mao Mao had her simply pour scented oil on the guests and rub it in casually. Then, while the guests were relaxed, she guided her to start some gossip. After a busy day, Mao Mao saw consort Rishu again. This time, she greeted her, which frightened both the consort and her maid. Mao Mao also noticed the scars from hair removal on consort Rishu and asked if she wanted to try a new hair removal method. Without waiting for an answer, she pulled the young girl to their massage table and took out the thread used for hair removal. After enjoying a full set of massages, consort Rishu seemed utterly drained. She was married to the previous emperor as a political tool when she was young, became a nun after his death, and was later brought back to the palace as a consort. Her life story is quite pitiful. Fortunately, she can now support each other with her current maid. Mao Mao asked the maid if she wanted to try it, but she shook her head in fear. Consort Rishu then gave Mao Mao and her friend some iced fruit juice as a thank you gift. While drinking the juice, Mao Mao curiously asked her why she came to the large bathhouse, only to learn a shocking piece of news. There are ghosts in the bathhouse of Jinggang Palace. There was a ghost causing trouble in the harem, specifically in the palace of Rishu, who was known for being the most timid. Mao Mao couldn't just ignore this news. She was considering discussing it with Lord Jinshi when he unexpectedly arrived at their Pomegranate Palace. Since receiving the Bezoar, Mao Mao had been slightly distracted, realizing she had stumbled upon a major secret, making her interaction with Jinshi awkward. Jinshi's visit was to request that Empress Gyokuyuhi return Mao Mao to him, stressing that it had only been a temporary arrangement. Jinshi then approached Mao Mao, calling her name naturally and setting a meeting before departing swiftly. Empress Gyokuyuhi couldn't help but ask Mao Mao if something had happened between them during their hunting trip. Mao Mao simply blamed it on a frog. The next day, she accompanied Jinshi to the Kongu Palace and began to wonder if Kojun was really a eunuch. However, such matters were not her concern as a palace maid. They first met with Rishu, whose treatment in the Kongu Palace was clearly poor, as the palace maids openly disrespected her. Jinshi began his investigation with the haunted bathroom, where Rishu had seen strange shadows through the window. The former chief maid, arriving with other maids dressed lavishly, dared to scold Rishu in front of Jinshi, claiming she was just seeking attention. The chief maid dominated the conversation, as if she were the ruler of the palace. Mao Mao noticed the hairpin she wore, while Jinshi spoke softly to the maid, stating his duty was to attend to the consort's needs, which effectively quieted the maids as they hurried to serve tea and water. With the maids gone, Rishu explained the full story. She bathed alone as usual since the maids disliked her, only receiving help with dressing from the current chief maid. Feeling hot after drying off post-bath, she opened the curtains even though the window was closed. Yet she saw the curtains move and a pale face dancing and staring at her, which left her terrified. The chief maid also saw the ghost and bravely approached it, but it disappeared as she got closer, and the curtain stopped moving. Mao Mao inspected the room, noting all windows leading outside were tightly closed, so no wind could enter. She found the room's layout odd, questioning why there was a storage room next to the bathroom. She learned the adjacent room wasn't originally a storage area, but was converted due to severe mold issues, as the maids were too lazy to clean it. The building, constructed when Rishu entered the palace a few years ago, shouldn't have deteriorated so quickly. Noticing the curtain in front, Mao Mao realized this was what Rishu and the chief maid had seen. She asked to be shown to the bathroom, where she noticed the bathtub's drain likely connected to the harem's water system. She confirmed with Rishu that the bathtub plug had accidentally been removed that day. Combining the tightly closed windows, moving curtain, and removed plug, Mao Mao gradually pieced together the answer. She returned to the storage room and asked Kojun to help move a cabinet. She then brought in the construction plans of the Kongu Palace. Indeed, there was a water pipe running beneath this section of the floor. The hot water passing through here caused the floor and walls to deteriorate more easily, and the steam escaping through gaps in the floor created drafts that made the curtains flutter. As for the face, Mao Mao found a mirror in the storage room. This bronze mirror was formerly used frequently by Rishu, but she had stopped using it after receiving a clearer mirror from a messenger. However, because the mirror was a keepsake from her mother, Rishu still polished it daily. Mao Mao asked Rishu to hold the mirror while she drew back the curtain and adjusted the mirror's angle. Unexpectedly, a face appeared on the wall again. It turned out to be a magic mirror, or a transparent mirror, which reflected light in such a way that it projected images or text on the wall. Moonlight reflecting off the polished mirror had cast a face on the wall, and the steam from the gap fluttered the curtain, creating the appearance of a ghost. Rishu burst into tears, recognizing the face as resembling her deceased mother. Perhaps her mother was upset because she had stopped using the mirror, and it was her way of appearing. Furthermore, her mother had loved dancing, but had to stop due to health issues after giving birth to Rishu and passed away not long afterward. Realizing this, Rishu broke down in tears on the floor. Mao Mao, though not fully understanding, showed respect. Then, the former chief maid returned, saw Rishu crying, and feigned concern. Noticing the mirror in her arms, she snatched it away, claiming Rishu already had the mirror from the messenger and didn't need this one. Rishu, who had cherished this mirror for comfort, unexpectedly reacted with rare anger and wrestled to retrieve it. The maid scolded Rishu for her impropriety. Jinshi stepped forward, softly reprimanded the maid, and removed a hairpin from her head. The maid was startled awake from her delusions. The hairpin bore the emblem of a higher-ranked consort, which was inappropriate for a mere maid to use. Jinshi's warning instilled fear in her. He had always known about the maids bullying Rishu, but had kept silent to protect the dignity of higher-ranking consorts. Now, with tangible evidence, he could issue a warning. After returning from Kongu Palace, Mao Mao visited the imperial physician to study anesthetics. She became curious about how eunuchs enter the harem. The physician explained that previously, proof was sufficient for entry, but due to many issues, now palpation by officials from 3 different departments is required to confirm the absence of male genitalia during entry and exit checks. This made Mao Mao doubt Jinshi's identity again. Then, the physician mentioned the new eunuchs. Mao Mao had heard from Shisui and Karan that many of the new eunuchs were handsome young men. Recently, while preparing hot water in the bathhouse, one had become entangled with a lower-ranked consort. Meanwhile, Kojun urged Jinshi to confess his true identity to Mao Mao, suggesting he recruit her to their side before her biological father intervened. This man had seized leadership of his family from his father and half-brother years ago, and was highly respected by the emperor. If Jinshi intended to make Mao Mao one of his people, he had to be honest with her. Jinshi, however, feared how Mao Mao might react to the truth, and preferred to delay this matter while handling official duties. Complaints about Empress Lulan dominated. Some said she had too many maids, others criticized her lavish attire, but there were other issues, like maids eyeing the handsome new eunuchs. Jinshi used this as an opportunity to inspect and met the reputedly beautiful new eunuch, who had suffered severe beatings, showing paralysis on the left side and scars all over his body, reluctant to show his skin. As several maids admired his looks, Jinshi, still more popular among them, consoled the new eunuchs. Suddenly he heard an argument nearby. A maid had accidentally spilled ice meant for a higher-ranked consort, and it turned out to be Karan. Karan accidentally bumped into a eunuch, knocking over a block of ice, and Jinshi happened to see this. People around them started murmuring. Karan was terrified and didn't know what to do, but Mao Mao stepped in front of her and apologized to the eunuch. However, an apology wasn't enough. The ice was dirty, and during this season, ice was very valuable, even more so than a common servant girl. Mao Mao quickly wrapped the ice again. It was meant for Princess Lulan, who wanted to enjoy ice desserts in the cool of the evening. Unfortunately, Mao Mao had no connections with Lulan, but she thought of a remedy. She decided to use the ice to make the dessert directly and have the eunuch deliver it to Lulan. They had only 1 hour. Ignoring Jinshi and the crowd, Mao Mao pulled Karan and rushed back to the medical ward to understand the full story. It turned out a junior concubine had given Karan a hairpin, making her overly excited and careless. Jinshi followed them with Kojun, curious about what Mao Mao would do. Mao Mao forcefully borrowed the kitchen and ingredients from Jinshi, who couldn't really say no, though he wanted to tease Mao Mao a bit. Initially, Mao Mao had only used Karan as a source of information in the harem and had given her sweets in return, so they were even. However, Seeing Karan publicly embarrassed, Mao Mao couldn't just stand by. She told Jinshi she wouldn't be able to sleep if he didn't help, which amused him. He agreed to lend the kitchen but asked for a condition, since he noticed Mao Mao never wore hairpins, and wondered if she had sold the one he gave her at the last garden party. Mao Mao guiltily denied it, but admitted she might sell it later. Jinshi then asked her to wear that hairpin when meeting him, and also had something else to tell her. Mao Mao didn't understand, but the priority was to help Karan with the ice. They entered the kitchen with the eunuch, where the ingredients available were sugar, milk, and various fruits. Mao Mao poured milk and sugar into a container and had Karan stir continuously. Then, she took a hammer, smashed the ice, added it to a large container with salt, and placed the sweetened milk inside to freeze, continuing to stir until it solidified. She then mixed in the chopped fruits, and just like that, a delicious fruit ice cream was made. If there had been more time, they could have added eggs and herbs for flavor, but this would suffice to deceive anyone. Seeing the issue resolved, Karan relaxed and even tasted some of the leftover ice cream. The eunuch also tried it and was overjoyed, confident it was enough to fulfill his duty. Karan massaged Mao Mao's back and shoulders in gratitude, and they hastily finished the rest of the ice cream, not realizing that Shisui, who had appeared out of nowhere, had taken some. Watching the two fight over the ice cream, Mao Mao noticed there was enough ice left to make another batch, which the two started to share. This scene made Mao Mao, with her maternal instincts, deeply satisfied. That night, back at the Pomegranate Palace, Princess Gyokuyuhi felt her stomach move again. She called her daughter over to feel it. She was nearing her due date, and so far everything was going smoothly, although she noted this child was different from her daughter, as it only kicked below. Mao Mao immediately sensed trouble. After receiving permission from Princess Gyokuyuhi, Mao Mao touched her belly, and then inquired about her first childbirth from Hanyan, who had delivered it. The midwife originally assigned had fallen ill, but fortunately, Hanyan had learned midwifery skills, and the delivery went smoothly. However, this time, there seemed to be a complication. Mao Mao explained that the baby might be breech, as normally, a head-down position facilitates easier delivery, and kicking upwards indicated this. Kicking downward suggested the baby was upright, increasing the risk during childbirth, as the legs would emerge first. Relying solely on feeling, Mao Mao couldn't be certain and suggested a further examination. Princess Gyokuyuhi agreed to let her check. The examination indicated a high possibility of a breech baby. With the due date approaching, the options were limited to acupuncture and physical activities to try to correct the baby's position. Mao Mao knew acupuncture and planned to seek additional advice outside the palace. If correction failed, a cesarean section might be necessary, which, given the medical standards of the time, posed a significant risk to the mother. This would require a highly skilled doctor and an experienced midwife. A mediocre practitioner was out of the question. Mao Mao thought of an ideal candidate, who was both a skilled doctor and a eunuch, her adoptive father, Roman, who also had experience with cesarean sections. However, his status as a convicted person was a concern. Hanyan immediately expressed disapproval. Mao Mao argued strongly, vouching for her father's character. She explained that his expulsion had occurred during the Empress's reign, suggesting that not all charges from that time were trustworthy. Hearing this, Princess Gyokuyuhi decided to discuss the matter with Jinshi to see if they could consider bringing Mao Mao's father into the palace, noting that many had been manipulated under the Empress's rule. With the princess's approval, Hanyan reluctantly agreed. 2 days later, Rumen was personally escorted into the palace by Kojun. He would temporarily serve as a doctor in the palace medical ward. After visiting Princess Gyokuyuhi, Mao Mao felt relieved knowing a competent doctor was in charge, as she also worried about the risks of employing a mediocre one. After Roman left, others gathered around to gossip, feeling that Mao Mao's adoptive father was not what they had expected, appearing very proper and disciplined. Meanwhile, the beautiful eunuch who had caused a stir among the palace maids was standing in a grove, looking at the tombstones. Mao Mao's foster father, Rumen, has officially started working in the harem. Mao Mao pulled out the hairpin that Jinshi had given her before, preparing to meet him later. Rumaman gets along well with the quack doctor and also likes the kitten very much. Since the kitten only eats small dried fish, he would eat the leftover heads and tails. While preparing moxibustion materials for Empress Gyokuyuhi, Mao Mao listened to their chat. Her foster father reminded her to inform the imperial physician before using any medicinal herbs. Now, Ruaman is also an imperial physician in the medical institution of the harem. Besides Empress Gyokuyuhi, Empress Rafahi is also pregnant with a royal heir. If both are under Ruman's care, Mao Mao feels relieved. At this point, The quack doctor started gossiping about new maids arriving at the Crystal Palace, including several older ones, which changed the atmosphere of the palace. Ruman said that having more experienced maids was a good thing. During his days in the palace, he had noticed issues in the harem and compiled them all. He asked Mau Mau to take this compilation to the calligraphy school for the students to use as a model text for copying practice. After reviewing it without finding any oversights, Mau Mau left the medical institution with her things. Before leaving, she remembered that Empress Gyokuyohi mentioned being easily fatigued recently, so she took some additional medicinal herbs. Thinking it would take a while to get approval to see Jinshi, she decided to go to the calligraphy school first. Unexpectedly, the teacher at the calligraphy school recognized Ruomen's handwriting immediately, as they were old acquaintances. Despite Ruomen's potential to be a civil officer, he became an imperial physician due to his pity for a sickly stray child. The teacher was also curious about why Karan wasn't with Mau Mau, and learned that Karan was busy looking for after-work tasks and gossiping about young eunuchs. The teacher remarked that getting too excited wasn't good. It was said that the young eunuchs were assigned to the south side, causing the palace maids not to work diligently, so some were also moved to the north side. Now, the palace maids in the treatment area also have the help of these eunuchs, which should make their work easier. Jinshi thought of that person, believing she would definitely make full use of the young eunuchs. After the casual chat, Mau Mau remembered the main task and conveyed her foster father's request. The teacher knew what he wanted. Ramen had written similar things before, but back then, he copied it alone, though the teacher had helped write some as well. It seems that with age, this old fellow also learned to delegate tasks. Of course, that was over 20 years ago. At that time, Ruomen was still serving as an imperial physician. The slogans were merely thoughtful reminders. Do not use lead, containing face powder, and use less strongly scented oils. The content is similar to what we have today. Mau Mau sensed something was amiss and quickly excused herself from the teacher and hurried away. Although the slogans were well-intentioned, they could also teach those with malicious intent how to harm others. Most harem staff are rotated every 2 years, and the consorts had also changed due to the previous emperor's death. Thus, the only ones who would know the content of those old reminders are the older palace maids in the treatment area. Mau Mau rushed to the treatment area and first delivered her distilled high-concentration alcohol to Shenryu. Then, she began to inquire about the condition of the maids there, many of whom had been there for decades. Shenryu, for instance, entered the harem at the age of 10. After all, the previous emperor favored young girls. If favored by the emperor, even ordinary maids could not leave the harem. Mau Mau couldn't help but feel sad for these maids, and even sadder for the victims, as the malice towards the harem consorts was entrenched here. Originally, it was Shenryu who requested Mau Mau to treat a sick maid at the Crystal Palace. However, it's possible that Shenryu was the one who informed Shin how to make abortion drugs. Initially, the sick maid came to the treatment area and casually mentioned not wanting to infect the pregnant consort Rifahi. Shenryu then wrote down some substances harmful to pregnant women and had the maid pass them to Shin, reminding everyone not to bring these substances into the palace. However, Shin harbored malice towards consort Rifahi and used these materials to create abortion drugs. At that time, a trading caravan was visiting, and perhaps the maids at the treatment area informed Shin that the caravan would sell those goods. This kind of malice, not amounting to murderous intent, thus gradually eroded the harem. Although these are reasonable conjectures, Mau Mau did not openly confront Shenryu since there was no evidence or testimony. She did not want this place to disappear, as otherwise, the maids would have nowhere to receive medical treatment. Thus, Mau Mau stood up, planning to borrow a book before leaving. She also noticed an insect atlas on the bookshelf, featuring a moth she had seen in Shisui's cage. Could this guidebook have been brought by Shisui? But how could Shisui, a menial maid, possess such a precious book? Mau Mau recalled that Shisui used a paper notebook when drawing insects and was literate. Why would she be a menial maid? Just then, the door opened, and the legendary beautiful eunuch walked in. Mau Mau recognized her at a glance as Suirei. Suirei clearly heard their earlier conversation, telling Shenryu that Mau Mau had guessed what she had done. Mau Mau showed no panic on her face, only pondering whether to throw the alcohol bottle at her and escape. Suirei then pulled out 2 sharp hairpins as a threat, not wanting the hassle of disposing of a body. Mau Mau noticed scars on her hands, possibly side effects from a resurrection drug. Previously, Suirei had attempted suicide by poisoning after a failed assassination, but it was actually a feigned death using drugs to temporarily simulate death, leaving lingering after effects. Suirei asked Mau Mau if she wanted to know her purpose. Regardless of her wishes, Suirei pulled Shisui out, using her to coerce Mau Mau into leaving the harem with her. She also tempted her with the method to make the resurrection drug. As expected, Mau Mau could not resist the temptation. On the other side, Jinshi and Shisho were suddenly invited by Rakan to have tea together after the court session. Rakan, representing the civil officials, and Shisho, representing the military officers, led Jinshi to agree. Jinshi always covered his face with a veil and had Basin relay his words. Rakan brought up the recent assassination attempt on Jinshi in Shisho's territory and then pulled out a design drawing of a musket from his sleeve. He had acquired it during the investigation. This musket seemed to be the latest model from the western regions, with a low misfire rate and simple construction. If it could be mass-produced, it might change the form of warfare, allowing for denser troop formations. It was concerning that the culprits attempting to assassinate the Emperor's brother had such a weapon. Where did they get it from? Rakan was somewhat aggressive towards Shisho, but Shisho remained calm, as investigating this matter was Rakan's responsibility. Rakan chuckled and scratched his head, mentioning that the interrogator had been too heavy-handed, and they couldn't get any information. Thus, he had no choice but to ask Lord Shisho. Naturally, Shisho knew nothing. Rakan then pulled out a chess manual, ready to discuss serious matters, which turned out to be showing off his love life. The manual was a replica from a game he played with his wife the previous day. Rakan enthusiastically praised his wife's intelligence and wit, though Shisho showed no interest. Still, Rakan insisted on giving him the chess manual and game records. Then, servants poured some wine, and Rakan commented on how beautifully the red liquid filled the glass, even though the wine was clearly green. Shisho did not object, and simply took his leave. After the meeting, Jinshi returned to his palace, removed his veil, and revealed a face even softer than Jinshi's. It was Ardwohi. After all, Jinshi was busy dealing with Mao Mao's matters, as Mao Mao had gone missing. After Mao Mao was taken by Suire, she did not return to the Jade Palace for a long time. Empress Gyokuyohi assumed Jinshi had called her, but Jinshi knew nothing about it. They searched many places where Mao Mao might have gone, but found no one. All they knew was that she disappeared after leaving the Imperial Hospital the day before. Considering the many people Mao Mao had offended, both Jinshi and Empress Gyokuyohi were understandably worried. Jinshi immediately took Kojin to the Imperial Hospital to gather information. They found Ruomen, who seemed unconcerned, and methodically recounted the previous day's events. Mao Mao had been preparing medicines at the hospital and then went to the calligraphy room, but never returned. Jinshi gained no new clues there. He realized that the kitten was also missing. Ruomen remembered that when Mao Mao was leaving, the kitten was persistently rubbing against her, seemingly after she had taken some fatigue-relieving medicine. Ruomen checked the medicine and indeed found some missing. He speculated something and decided to look for the kitten, thinking it might lead them to Mao Mao. Jinshi and others quickly followed. Surprisingly, they found the kitten in the northern woods, rolling under a tree. Nearby, in a tree hollow, they found the medicine and a crumpled piece of paper, which was blank. Yet, Ruomen, understanding his foster daughter well, took everyone back to the hospital. He heated the paper over a candle, revealing words written with alcohol that appeared under the heat. The medicine turned out to be catnip, which intoxicates cats. Mao Mao had used the kitten as a marker. However, only the character, Shrine, was vaguely discernible on the paper. Thinking of an old building to the north of the harem, Jinshi sent people there. After explaining this, Ruomen returned to his duties, as worrying alone was useless, especially since he trusted Mao Mao's capabilities. Recalling how she had disappeared for a year when she was first abducted into the palace, Jinshi, struck by the father-daughter resemblance, took the clue seriously and decided to take the paper to Empress Gyokuyohi for identification. The maids gathered around, and the three sisters thought it resembled the character for Jade. Sekyu, who had gone to the bathhouse with Mao Mao, remembered a maid named Shisui, who seemed close to Mao Mao. However, Jinshi, who managed the harem's affairs, had never heard of such a maid. He immediately ordered a search, his worry manifesting as clenched fists, especially since the name included Jade and there was Suire. Elsewhere, Mao Mao and Shisui, held by Suire, were on a boat drifting downstream. Suire had taken them to the place where Mao Mao and Shisui first met, where she had secretly left the paper and catnip. Inside that building was a secret passage. Suire advised them to pretend to be country girls sold to the city, changing clothes in the carriage. During the change, the alcohol was discovered. All Mao Mao had left was a hairpin Jinshi had given her. She considered escaping with Shisui but eventually up. Shisui, seeking comfort, leaned on Mao Mao's shoulder, and they fell asleep cuddled together. They changed boats twice, and by the time they disembarked, it was daylight. Mao Mao followed Suire and the guards while quietly observing the surroundings. They seemed to be heading north on the boat, but the forest was warm and humid. Mao Mao looked for unusual herbs. Suddenly, a rustling in the bushes startled Suire. Shisui discreetly moved to block her, and it turned out to be a snake. Mao Mao, noticing Shisui's actions, threw the snake in front of Suire, startling her into collapse. Unexpectedly, Shisui threw the snake aside and comforted Suirei, an unlikely action for a hostage. Mao Mao confirmed her suspicions and helped calm Suirei before questioning Shisui about her prior acquaintance with Suirei. She had suspected something since Shisui's education and demeanor exceeded her apparent status. Most importantly, Mao Mao remembered their first meeting when a kitten suddenly appeared from a secret passage, surely surprising Shisui. Now exposed, Shisui, acknowledging Mao Mao's perceptiveness, asked her not to do that again as her sister Suirei was very afraid of snakes. After confirming this, Mao Mao understood more, like where the kitten came from and why Shisui frequently went to the bathhouse when Suirei, posing as a eunuch, started working there, facilitating their meetings. Yet, she didn't understand why they took her out of the harem. Was it to use her to control her real father? At that moment, Suirei cut the ropes binding Mao Mao, stating that since they were already there was nowhere to escape. After a long walk, they arrived at a village in the wilderness, a hot spring town, which explained the humidity and warmth. Mao Mao spotted someone in foreign attire, reminding her of a diplomat. But before she could confirm, she accidentally bumped into a young boy who cursed at her. Furious, Mao Mao was about to punch him when Shisui struck first. The boy called Shisui and Suirei sister, asking if they had returned the festival starting the next day. He dragged Shisui to choose festival lanterns, and Suirei took Mao Mao along. While Suirei spoke with the hosts, Mao Mao noticed someone nearby the guard who had been with the diplomat. Suirei saw her curiosity but did not respond. Shisui pulled Mao Mao inside to pick lanterns and masks. Mao Mao, picking up a mask, silently pondered how long away from the harem. Meanwhile, Jinshi's men found the old shrine's secret passage leading outside the harem, indicating Mao Mao had been taken out. On the same day Mao Mao disappeared, the beautiful eunuch also vanished, and the maid named Shisui was not officially registered. Just then, an aide burst in Empress Gyokuyohi was in trouble. Jinshi visited the Emerald Palace with his entourage to see Lady Gyokuyohi, who had shown signs of labor since morning, though it was still a while until her due date. The palace maids could only prepare in advance. Fortunately, with Ruomen present, the pain was alleviated, and Mao Mao's treatment was showing effects, gradually correcting the baby's position. Hearing Mao Mao's name made Jinshi feel uneasy, but seeing the chaos among the incompetent doctors reassured him somewhat. After leaving Lady Gyokuyohi, Kojin reported on a young eunuch who claimed to be a slave from abroad. This eunuch had no close associates among his peers and likely infiltrated midway. He had been distancing himself from others in the palace, so there was little information to gather. However, someone had seen this eunuch praying in front of a temple. The northern graves housed maids who had served the previous emperor and met their ends in the harem. During the emperor's reign, girls who had lost their virginity at a young age could not leave the Forbidden City after death, and even their names weren't recorded. Jinshi headed to that graveyard and found Shenryu from the clinic there, who hurriedly left upon seeing him. Jinshi smelled alcohol on her and grabbed her, demanding to know Mao Mao's whereabouts. Realizing his abruptness, he put on his eunuch mask again, smiling, and asked Shenryu about a maid with freckles. His smile, however, brought back Shenryu's darkest nightmares. As a young girl, she had been seduced and led astray by the previous emperor. She mocked Jinshi, hinting that not everyone was aware of his youthful appearance. The person she remembered from her youth, with a voice sweet as honey and an angelic face, had drastically changed by old age and had not visited since she grew up. Shenryu continued, lost in her past recollections, but questioned why someone like Jinshi would pretend to be a eunuch. Realizing she knew his true identity, Jinshi let go, and the guards promptly restrained her. Kun asked how to handle her, but Jinshi was stunned. Shenryu took the opportunity to swallow poison she carried. Jinshi was still unresponsive, so Kojin had to order the guards to induce vomiting and send Shenryu to the Imperial Hospital. He then shook Jinshi, urging him to pull himself together and not be swayed by a maid's words. Jinshi knew that no one would risk their life over mere words. He asked Kojin if he really resembled someone so much that it frightened the maids to the point of taking poison. Jinshi had no real memories of the previous emperor, who was already a withered old man in his earliest memories, and he did not resemble his mother or brother. Jinshi believed they had no blood relation. He had stayed in this female-dominated garden only to avoid responsibilities in the Eastern Palace. Now, standing before a gravestone inscribed with the name Taiho, a maid who died last year known for hosting ghost story gatherings, he pondered. She was once a maid to a certain concubine, and the only blood relative she had was a daughter born from a secret liaison with a physician during the emperor's reign. Jinshi suddenly remembered a figure and immediately headed to Pomegranate Palace, where Taiho's former concubine had been given to Shisho. and they had a daughter, Princess Lulin. Taiho and the physician's daughter were expelled from the harem together. Perhaps Princess Lulin knew of the physician and her daughter's whereabouts? At Pomegranate Palace, the concubines and maids were dressed lavishly, with dramatic eye makeup resembling foxes. Jinshi was about to inquire about Taiho when he noticed a mole near Princess Lulin's eye. He approached and removed her fan, demanding to know who she really was. He knew every palace maid's name and face. With 7 maids at Pomegranate Palace changing outfits and makeup daily, Jinshi still remembered distinguishing features. He accurately called out the name of the maid impersonating Princess Lulin, realizing that her entry into the palace was a deception. She had brought many servants to the harem and selected a maid resembling her, along with exaggerated outfits and makeup, to blur her own existence. Jinshi confronted the maid, asking where Princess Lulin had gone. The maid, too scared to speak and crying, was backed up by the head maid, who claimed they knew nothing. Jinshi had no choice but to take them for questioning. The head maid only shared that Princess Lulin had said she would never return, and they did not know where she went. Pressing further seemed pointless. Jinshi pondered their motives while also worrying about Mao Mao. Meanwhile, the news of Mao Mao's disappearance reached her biological father, Rakan, who flew into a rage and stormed out to rescue his daughter, even breaking the palace gates in the process. Basin reported this incident to Jinshi. They were unsure how the news had leaked, and now they had also lost track of Shisho. Could it be that father and daughter were accomplices? As for the maid Shen Ryu, she barely survived but refused to say anything. However, investigations revealed she knew Taiho, which might explain her involvement in the conspiracy. Yet, no one else in the medical ward seemed to know about this. However, Jinshi was certain they must have also provided assistance, as they harbored resentment towards the harem similar to Shen Ryu's. The priority was to quickly locate Princess Lulin and Shisho. At that moment, Rakan's adopted son, Rahan, requested to see Jinshi. Rahan presented him with a treasury ledger, which his father had instructed him to investigate. He had looked into the circles of the officials who had been punished, and noticed that the price of grain had significantly increased over the past few years, without any droughts or locust plagues. Additionally, the price of iron ore had also risen, despite no major construction projects in recent years. Jinshi understood Rahan's implications. Grain itself wasn't valuable, but the quantity was large. Increasing the price could yield a significant profit margin. Someone had embezzled a large sum of money. The rise in metal prices indicated that someone was buying it in large quantities. Both clues pointed in the same direction, though only a few had the capacity to execute such a scheme. Rahan indicated he could investigate further, but Jinshi knew there would be conditions. He asked Rahan to state them. Unexpectedly, Rahan produced a bill cost for repairing the palace gate that Rakan had damaged, seemed excessively high. He hoped Jinshi could kindly adjust it. The two struck a deal. Meanwhile, Mao Mao stood alone by a window, deep in thought. After being taken hostage, Mao Mao wasn't mistreated by Shisui's group. They even invited her to join their festival. The fox masks were painted by Mao Mao herself. While red eyeliner was customary, Shisui's mask featured green instead. When Mao Mao struggled with tying the cords, Shisui voluntarily styled her hair. Mao Mao produced the hairpin Jinshi had gifted her. Shisui seemed fond of it, and asked if Mao Mao would surrender it. Remembering Jinshi's tsundere expression, Mao Mao immediately refused, though she still didn't know if she'd return alive. The festival occurred at a shrine outside town. At nightfall, villagers carrying lanterns streamed toward the gates. Everyone wore fox masks, making Mao Mao feel transported to another world. She noticed other green-lined masks like Shisui's, mostly worn by men, perhaps holding special significance. Lantern-attracted locusts swarmed periodically. Shisui remarked this year's locust plague necessitated an extravagant festival to ward off disaster. She plucked a lantern plant berry, ignoring Mao Mao's warning about its bitterness. "I know," Shisui said before popping it in her mouth, and immediately spitting it out. Reaching the shrine, Shisui shared the villagers' history. Long ago, these people belonged to one ethnic group, until Western migrants arrived. Only a few villages accepted them. These Westerners possessed agricultural knowledge, enriching soil and repelling pests. Greed for fertile land sparked conflict, forcing them to establish hidden villages. Foxes symbolized these knowledgeable Western migrants, the villagers' ancestors. Legends said their foxes were white, thus original masks were white too. Colored masks represented assimilation, Mau Mau privately theorized. White foxes symbolized fair-skinned migrants, gradually blending through intermarriage. The tale felt eerily familiar, similar to Granny's old story. Shisui revealed most village men couldn't distinguish colors, though few women shared this trait, hence their green eyeliner substitution for red. Mau Mau realized the Queen Mother's entourage in the capital and these white fox people hiding in forests shared Western origins. Placing masks in offering boxes, they'd be burned after 1 year. Post-worship, Shisui took Mau Mau festival hopping. Surprisingly, lively stalls sold. Grilled skewers, frogs, and locusts. Traumatized by past experiences, Mau Mau refused frog meat. The boy who'd painted beautiful masks earlier now sat enshrined as deity. Children took shifts guarding this role. Approaching shift change, Shisui led Mau Mau behind the shrine. They found children complaining about the village chief's hollow rice ears, grown in poor soil. Mau Mau donated her own plump ears. The boy emerged, and 3 witnessed last year's mask-burning ritual. Masks hung on river scaffolds. Legend claimed wishes written on masks would be granted if completely burned. Mau Mau scoffed at superstitions, but the boy fervently believed, though refused to share his wish. Torchbearers arrived. Strong adults fired flaming arrows into straw pyres beneath masks. Some masks burned swiftly. Others fell into water, drowning unfulfilled wishes. Shisui gazed at the flames and sighed. Insects can't survive winter. They only leave offspring behind, just like these masks nurturing future blessings. Mau Mau didn't fully understand, but followed Shisui back after the festival. Suire closed her book and brought them dinner. Mau Mau immediately pressed about the resurrection drug formula. Truthfully, she found it strange. As a hostage, she wasn't imprisoned, but included in activities. Yet she only wanted the formula. She'd already guessed some ingredients, but needed precise measurements and information about side effects. Suire frowned. No data are required. This drug induces prolonged unconsciousness to create compliant slaves. The side effect. She showed scars on her hands. Failure might cause memory loss. It still needs adjustments. Mau Mau's eyes lit up. She begged Suire to experiment on her. No need to hold back. Shisui watched their interaction fondly, noting their improved relationship. Next day, Suire delivered herbal medicine books, ordering Mau Mau to study in her room. Without escape attempts, Mau Mau immersed herself completely, neglecting meals until Shisui hand-fed her. The boy mocked her lofty attitude, acting all high like Lady Shenmei. While Shisui styled her hair, Mau Mau flipped through books. Shisui produced Jinchi's gifted hairpin again. This exquisite piece. Experts would recognize the craftsman's patron. Mau Mau lamented. Guess I can't sell it. Jinchi would interrogate me anyway. Feeling her hairstyle lacked something, Shisui added her own hairpin. Mother forced me to learn this as child. You should avoid such harsh training. After warning Mau Mau to behave, Shisui departed. 6 hours of reading later, Mau Mau opened the window for air. She spotted unharvested rice fields and a granule outside the village, likely the chief's poor soil farmland. The boy barged in as she pondered. Mau Mau inquired about a nearby building. That's the chief's old warehouse. Rats infested it, so we built elevated floors elsewhere. Suspicious, Mau Mau demanded inspection. The boy proudly bypassed guards. Kneeling by the warehouse, Mau Mau noticed window dimensions matching. The stunted rice field's light exposure area. Nighttime lighting here stunts growth. Where there's rats. Her eyes widened. Unlimited test subjects. The boy picked the lock effortlessly. Inside, cages of lab rats and experimental equipment greeted them. Mau Mau nearly salivated at the research logs. The boy lifted a metal tube curiously. Mau Mau yanked back a curtain, revealing 2 completed handguns. Disaster. This was a firearms workshop. The weapons matched those used in Jinchi's assassination attempt. Connections confirmed. Footsteps echoed outside. Mau Mau dragged the boy into hiding. A heavily made-up woman entered, complaining about the unlocked door.
Her companion was the previous envoy. The woman, Lady Shenmei herself, clearly suspected intruders. Her sword slashed through curtains, blade pointing directly at Mao Mao and the boy.